Здравствуйте, уважаемые коллеги, уважаемые участники сессии. От имени Министерства энергетики позвольте поприветствовать вас. Мы, как вы все знаете, Казахстан последовательно...
Kazakhstan supports the carbon neutrality targets and CO2 emission reduction, for which purpose we designed the long-term carbon neutrality strategy until 2060, by which we will introduce a number of key measures to reduce emissions, which includes 2 times increase of the share of renewables in electricity generation. We have taken obligation to struggle against the climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, understanding that the world is facing serious transformations in the energy sector. In connection with that, we are taking active steps towards development of renewable sources of energy, as well as achievement of key target indicators. Within the framework of the Green Economy Transition Strategy, development of renewable sources was first documented in 2009 in our legislation. Since that time, we've been applying the open mechanism of international emission bargain trade, which enjoyed big interest from potential investors. In those transactions, we saw participation of companies from 232 companies from 13 countries. As of today, in Kazakhstan, we have 139 renewable energy sources with the aggregate capacity of 2,600 megawatts. Until 2027, we plan to commission additional 33 projects with a capacity of approximately 1 gigawatt. This year, we approved the schedule for the auction bargains and design the plan until 2027, by which the total capacity of planned capacities to be auctioned totals approximately 6.7 gigawatts. That allows investors to plan their participation in those auctions. In general, we assign priority to the motivation of renewable sources energy in our country, and we will continue to actively develop the renewable green energy sector. I wish all of you successes and fruitful activity. Thank you.
For next opening remarks, I would like to invite Nariman Manabekov, Country Director for Asian Development Bank, Kazakhstan Resident Mission.
Usually I speak in English, but today, because of audience, I will speak in Russian with your permission. Уважаемые участники сессии, друзья АБ.
Dear friends, dear representatives of ABD, I greet you at this activity dedicated to experience exchange in the sphere of Energy Transition Mechanism implementation, ETM. We all know today we are observing the growing mining of coal, but experts forecast that its consumption will soon to reduce. Consequently, there cannot be optimistic perspectives for consumption of coal both inside Kazakhstan and abroad. At the same time, the negative consequences from coal burning for human health, we are all aware of that. And according to our research, in the next 10 to 15 years, the operation of coal-driven power plants and boilers will be more costly compared to average cost of new stations operating on renewable sources of energy. At the same time, in the developing countries, including Kazakhstan, coal power plants have long-term agreements on supplies of coal and sales of electric energy, which means they plan to work onwards to resolve that complicated dilemma and to help the countries structure the seamless transition from coal dependence. ABD commenced the work regarding the ETM introduction in 4 developing countries of the world. The ETM concept is based on research and consultations with a broad circle of concerned parties from the private and public sectors. ETM is a financial instrument for early decommissioning of coal power plants and augmented transition to renewable sources of energy. ETM is designed for a specific country within the framework of its political, legal, and energy systems. Kazakhstan is the first country in Central Asia that considers ETM pilot testing. ETM is inclusive of 2 financial sources. In each country, such sources shall be created if Kazakhstan expresses interest towards the launching of a pilot. We will have 2 funds. Funds for reduction of of the carbon emissions aimed to decommission coal assets, as well as the fund for the development of the clean energy aimed at increasing the capacities and storages of renewable energy. In some Asian countries where coal stations were built recently, such a transition appears to be quite a painful process with high level of resistance to the transition, and we are observing the same process here in Kazakhstan. However, transformation of industry associated with coal may attract significant investments into renewables, into storages, development of energy, transportation infrastructure. ABD, together with regional and international partners, studies the pilot ETM projects in 4 countries, and with the ABD support, the countries are evaluating their studying their legal and normative basis. Also, we are ranking the target coal power plants. We are structuring the funds I have already mentioned and preparing the regional partnership platforms for the zones. In some countries, already some feasibility studies and front-end engineering designs are being performed for the just transition. I think we shouldn't be discussing just transition in details here. Just transition means that nobody should suffer. Miners, first of all, Kazakhstan is a major producer and consumer of coal. More than 82% of greenhouse emissions come from coal, and they are associated with the high level of burning of coal in power plants. And the similar situation is in Indonesia, where 87% of all energy is produced through burning coal. Within the framework of a pilot project in Indonesia, we are continuing to structure work with public sector, private sector to decommission the operating and the eldest coal assets. The country declared willingness to abandon coal power plants stage by stage to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. And today our experts will share those plants. According to our calculations, the decommissioning of 50% of coal park in the said three countries, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam, will reduce CO2 emissions by 200 million tons a year, which is equivalent to decommissioning of 61 motor vehicles. We are well aware how complicated it is to reduce dependence on fossil fuel and to manage the economic development of the country. ABD accumulated solid experience and are ready to continue to support Kazakh government in its effort to abandon such dependence. Of course, the government will have to take some steps in response. They will need to reform the sector and introduce new state programs aimed at development of green technologies. Our experts are preparing a report about the augmented and accelerated decommissioning of individual coal-driven power plants and heat stations in Kazakhstan. Today, my colleagues will show you the preliminary analysis report made for the Kazakh coal park for the ranking and the early decommissioning of some of those assets. In future, we'll have to fulfill important and responsible tasks, taking into consideration special role of coal power plants in stable energy supplies in Kazakhstan. I wish all of the participants productive activity today. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. I'm inviting the next speaker, Senju Bai, ABD, Tokyo, Japan.
Let me speak in English, so please change the channel of translator. This distinguished guest, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to address you today at the esteemed KazEnergy Forum, where we will discuss the energy transition mechanism and its applicability in Southeast Asia and Kazakhstan. I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers for granting me this opportunity to speak before such an esteemed audience. The ETM represents a transformative approach to expedite the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. Developed in collaboration with developing member countries, this scalable and collaborative mechanism utilizes a market-based approach to mobilize public and private investments. Through the establishment of country-specific ETM funds, country can expedite the retirement of coal power assets beyond the limitations posed by the existing ownership structure. Today, we have gathered here to explore the experiments of the ETM in Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia, and examine the prospects of implementing this mechanism in Kazakhstan. This session will provide valuable insights into the ETM's journey and offer Kazakhstan an opportunity to learn from the best practice of other countries. We are honored to host distinguished speakers and experts in the field who will provide comprehensive presentations on the objectives, progress, and lessons learned from the ETM's implementation in various countries. Learning from the successes and challenges faced by Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries is crucial for Kazakhstan's own energy transition. Through a careful examination of their experience, we can identify effective policy measures, strategies, and institutional frameworks that can be adapted to the Kazakhstan context. This knowledge exchange will enable us to make well-informed decisions and expedite our progress towards a sustainable energy future. This conference serves as a platform that encourages participants to engage in meaningful dialogue and collaboration. The panel discussions featuring esteemed representatives from various ministries, research organizations, and experts provide a unique opportunity for cross-sector collaboration. Fostering an environment of knowledge sharing and open discussion, we can collectively identify the most suitable solutions and strategies for Kazakhstan energy transition. This session holds immense value as it allows us to learn from Indonesia's experience and gain the Asian Development Bank's perspective on the ETM. It underscores the importance of knowledge exchange and highlights the significance of adapting best practice from other countries to suit Kazakhstan's specific context. Let's seize this opportunity to deepen our understanding, foster collaboration, and pave the way for successful energy transition in Kazakhstan. I encourage all participants to actively engage in the open question and answer sessions as they provide a unique opportunity to exchange ideas, share experiences, and foster collaboration. It is through these interactions that we can collectively brainstorm innovative solutions and identify best practice to drive the energy transition forward. I would also like to express my deepest appreciation to all the distinguished speakers and panelists for their invaluable contributions. Your expertise and insights will undoubtedly shape the path we take toward a cleaner and more sustainable future. I also extend my gratitude to my ADBI-ADB and KazEnergy colleagues for their dedication and commitment to advancing the energy transition agenda. I wish you all a productive and enriching conference. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, DD Beck.
Now, I suggest all of you to join our next session. As we've mentioned during the opening remarks, the experience of Indonesia is very valuable for Kazakhstan, and we need to pay attention to that. So let us hear about the experience of Southeast Asia and Indonesia, and then we will have a discussion. The moderator of the next session is Murat Kaumenov. He is the director of the Kazakhstan British University. I hope you can all hear me. Dear participants, today is a very important day. Let me continue in Russian. So, good morning, good afternoon, dear colleagues. I think that today we've got a unique day. Not only will be discussing the international experience, but we'll also discuss of the results of the first study of whether this experience is applicable to Kazakhstan. Last year, when we started working with, when I still was working in KazEnergy, we made a survey of our members in the framework of the carbon neutrality strategy. We asked what kind of issues they had, what are the top 10 issues that could be the barriers in energy transition. At the time, the top issue that was mentioned was that, first of all, it's not only because it's coal generation, but also because the coal generation is very outdated with high level of deterioration, and it's 70% coal-based. The second issue that was mentioned was that first, the system needs to be maintained, and while doing the transition at the same time, and coal generation occurring because the international development institutes change their policies, and they're usually the cheapest resources that you can get. But at the time, international development institutes said that they're committed not to finance carbon-intensive projects, everything related to fossil fuels. So then the question was, where do we get the funding? Because if you raise the funds from the local banks, the costs of funding will be high. And then the question is, who's going to be paying for energy transition? So by looking at the top two issues, we started to look in KazEnergy for a financial tool that would help our sector in this energy transition in the most efficient and environmentally friendly aspect. You've already heard about energy trilemma: energy security, affordability, and environmental issues. Before that, the energy specialists and our government bodies were looking at the energy development primarily from the standpoint of energy security and second, affordability. And then the environmental matters came last. But now this trilemma is reversed, and environmental aspects are the key. So neither the tariff system nor the development plans satisfy it, because at the time the environmental logic was not a priority. Then we looked at the instrument at the time suggested by the ADB. We studied it. In theory, it sounds very pretty. You get funding for energy transition without losing energy security. And basically, in fact, that is an instrument that allows to incentivize, economically incentivize energy transition in the coal sector for them to transition either to low carbon development or renewable energy sources. So we started looking at it. We went to the ministry. At the time, the ministry supported us in this matter. The ministry then in turn approached the ADB for Kazakhstan to be considered in this pool of countries who are ready to apply this mechanism. And this is a very unique opportunity for us to learn about the practical experience of Indonesia, one of the large economies of Southeast Asia, and it's either 16th or 17th in the world. It's also like Kazakhstan is exporting coal, burning coal, although our climate is different, but they're also a large country with big distances, and use of coal is the foundation. And once we learned the ambitions of the country, that was certainly even exceeding what we were trying to undertake, because we were talking about 15%, they are talking about almost 29%. So it's great that the ADB gave this opportunity and invited our guests so that they can tell us what they're doing, what kind of challenging they're facing. Plus, this country has a lot of experience. They have the climatic agreements. So basically, the country now has two instruments to do this. And we prepared our questions, of course, but we will first hear from our speakers, our guests, and after that we'll invite our panelists, our experts, and we'll see whether we can make use of that experience in our case. So with that, let me invite our speakers and experts. We've got the Director for ETM in ADB, Andrew Jeffries. Sorry if I mispronounce your names. We also have Edo Mahendra, Coordinator from the Ministry of Maritime and Investment Affairs of Indonesia. And also we've got the Deputy Director of the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources of Indonesia. So let me first give the floor to Andrew. Andrew, can you hear us? Are you ready to start? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes. Anyway, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Jeffries from the Asian Development Bank, and I lead the team that is in managing our energy transition mechanism activities region-wide, as well as our Just Energy Transition Partnership support. First of all, I apologize for not being able to be there in person. I have conflicting obligations, and I'm going to talk this afternoon more broadly about the Energy Transition Mechanism, or the ETM. As stated, there'll be another presentation by my colleague from the Carbon Trust, specifically on the findings of our pre-feasibility work in Kazakhstan. That'll be in the following session. So next slide. I can't see the slides, so okay, next slide, please. So very quickly, I'm going to give you a quick overview of ETM and its rationale, the approach we're taking at the ADB, progress and work done to date, and then talk about some opportunities and challenges, strategies for private investment, and then key policy and other measures for implementing the ETM. I have many slides, so I'll be going through a number of them quite quickly, and I think this slide deck can be shared with the participants for more detailed looking later on. Next slide, please. And actually the slide after that. So very quickly, you know, what's the rationale for ETM in the first place? And I think some of the previous speakers have alluded to this, but legacy coal-fired power plants constitute the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from human activity. And, you know, there's a lot of investor interest in promoting renewable energy, but addressing the phase out of coal-fired power plant is a very important part of the overall equation to reaching our climate goals. So next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, okay. So, you know, this graph merely just shows that, you know, the amount of coal-fired electricity remains very significant in developing Asia. And as a multilateral development bank supporting our Asian developing member countries, you know, we've come up with this mechanism to try to help with the transition. Next slide. Next slide, please. So very quickly, you know, the main objective, accelerating the retirement of coal-fired power plants that are currently dominant in their grids, not just abates, you know, significant carbon emissions, but it also helps to unlock the required investments in renewables, storage, hydrogen, electric vehicles, and all the other clean technologies that are required. Next slide. So very specifically, what is the ETM? At the top, a very short answer is, you know, we've launched the ETM as a replicable and scalable market-based model to help accelerate the transition from coal to clean power. Below that is a very more specific definition. I won't read the whole thing. I think you will have access to this slide, but just in general, you know, we are looking to utilize concessional and commercial capital from various public and private sources to incentivize this early retirement or repurposing of coal-fired power plants And just quickly, not just, but other carbon-intensive power generation, such as heavy fuel oil, and in turn unlock clean energy and the other investments I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So we've created several financial structures. I'll show them quickly later, and we're working on our first pilot transaction in Indonesia. We look to learn from these pilots and ultimately achieve scale up. So, you know, our role at ADB is to help crowd in public and private sector partners to support this challenging type of transition. Next slide. All right, okay, this is a very busy slide and I won't go into a lot of detail on it, but it just basically shows the kind of broad snapshot of the program we have. On the left, we have, you know, the ETM Partnership Trust Fund, which is raising concessional funds from donor countries, governments, and philanthropies. And then we use those concessional funds and blend them with commercial priced funds. We have our carbon reduction facility, and that's specifically earmarked to retire coal-fired power plants or other heavy oil or other carbon-intensive power generation. And then we have our clean energy facility, which is actually trying to promote and scale up the clean alternatives or replacement. And of course, we have a lot of technical assistance that can go in, that accompanies all of this. Next slide. This shows in a picture, in a nutshell, the very broad, you know, objective of the energy transition mechanism. The graph on the left, the business as usual, shows coal-fired power generation in the orange, and then the clean energy in the green. And if you look on the right, with the energy transition, if we can bring forward the retirement or refurbishment of these more polluting sources of power generation, it unlocks a lot of space and it can be replaced with the green, cleaner technology. Next slide. Here's the same concept at the project level, individual project level. It shows, you know, a commercial operation of a coal-fired power plant. For example, one we're looking at in Indonesia entered into operations in 2012, and it has a 30-year power purchase agreement out to 2042. And through a ETM transaction, if we can shorten that power purchase agreement and pull it forward, then, you know, this just graph is just meant to clearly show pictorially, you know, the carbon emissions and what we're trying to achieve. Next slide. And the slide after that. Next slide. Yeah, so just very, yes, thank you. So actually, a previous slide very quickly. Yes, this slide I won't touch on, but it basically just shows how the ETM was launched and the momentum it's gained over the past few years, from announced during the COP26 in Glasgow, further discussed in the G20 meetings in Bali, Indonesia, and then also last year at COP27 in Egypt. Following slide. So this is the holistic approach anchoring the ETM. You know, this whole energy transition involves people supporting the just transition, supporting policies and regulations to accelerate this transition, and of course, scalable, multiple market-based models actually address and investments specifically in the power sector. And of course, the partnership. This involves governments, private sector, international financial institutions, commercial banks, philanthropies, CSOs. Everyone has a role to play in this overall transition. Following slide. Okay, so this basically shows the phased approach of the ETM. We usually start at the country level with a pre-feasibility study. As I mentioned before, we're near finalization of such a study in Kazakhstan, and I'll show later what we've done in some other countries. We follow that, that's a high-level, country-level look at some of the possibilities in the sector, and then we can drill down further with a full feasibility study, and this can lead to pilot transactions. And of course, the intention is to then scale up this ETM from the pilots. Next slide. So just a little more specific work on our feasibility study and piloting, project selection. There's a lot of factors that go into what projects are applicable or the low-hanging fruit for ETM, because coal-fired power, the baseload power they supply, provides grid stability and other factors. So, the plant age and the readability of replacement power, and also if it's an independently owned plant, what is the appetite of the current owners to enter into such a transaction? That's quite frankly very critical in order to come up with plants. Then we have, transaction structuring and financial analysis for specific projects. And the funding vehicle, that's part of our raising the concessional money from donor countries and philanthropies, and also commercial co-financing from other banks, in order to bring all the capital together to make these investments. And then lastly, on the right, the environmental, social, and governance aspects for the ETM, the socioeconomic impacts and planning for a just transition and affected people and communities. Next slide. This just further shows the commitment to the safeguards and the just transition that are very important for ETM work. We've conducted a regional feasibility study in Southeast Asia. We're working on a country-specific feasibility study in Indonesia and the Philippines. Such transactions will have to assess on the safeguard side the environmental, socioeconomic impacts, and of course the quantitative impacts from the just transition, and come up with mitigation measures and provide technical assistance and concessional funding as necessary, to facilitate all these activities. Next slide. This is just an overall snapshot of kind of the approach to the just transition. There's multiple levels. There's the individual asset level. If you're retiring a plant, what are the implications for its workers and employees and the community that particular project is located in? So the community and district level is important. And then there's the subnational or, region within the country, the national level and regional level. So these are all, all of these approaches are applicable to making this ETM work region-wide. Next slide. So slide after that. Yeah, so here is just a little snapshot of progress to date. Of course, Indonesia is where we've been very active for a number of years now. We've completed a pre-feasibility study and phase 1 of a full feasibility study. There's an ongoing strategic environmental and social assessment going on and stakeholder engagement. There's an ETM country platform that's formed by a government of Indonesia owned financial institution, PTSMI. We've got ongoing studies on specific transactions and overall an analysis and planning that goes into coming up with the pilot projects. And then on the partnership stride, we along with the World Bank worked with the government of Indonesia to apply for funds from the Climate Investment Fund's Accelerating Coal Transition, or CIFACT investment plan that brought $500 million of highly concessional funding available for Indonesia to be used for the transition. Philippines, we've done a pre-feasibility study, and we're working with the government of the Philippines, again, along with the World Bank and the IFC, to prepare their investment plan application to the CIF, or Climate Investment Funds. There also will be applying for $500 million of concessional financing. In Vietnam, we've done a pre-feasibility study or in direct discussions on further analysis. Kazakhstan, pre-feasibility study is ongoing, but very far along. And again, my colleague from the Carbon Trust will give a presentation later on those findings. And then in Pakistan, we've completed a pre-feasibility study, and we will walk through that with the government of Pakistan. Next slide. Slide after that. So what are the opportunities? You know, renewable energy costs have been rapidly declining, as we all know. The cost of operating existing coal plants is expected to be higher than these costs going forward. I know that's not a simple matter. You can't just judge the marginal cost of a solar plant with the marginal cost of coal when you need to have backup power and battery storage and other aspects in order to make intermittent renewables, work well in power delivery system. But, there's been a fourfold increase in global coal prices in recent years, and this might not apply to Pakistan, to Kazakhstan, that has a domestic supply, and Indonesia as well. But if many countries are dependent on imported coal, and if given these high prices, that causes energy security concerns and the need to diversify away from coal. There's also a lot of strategic government incentives and programs and targets to collateralize. And again, corporations themselves have net zero targets that help create opportunities for this transition. Next slide. Challenges, many coal plants have long-term power purchase agreements that would have to be renegotiated, take or pay contracts. These many economies are very fast growing with tight power supply. And so that makes early coal retirement more difficult. And finally, a relatively young age of coal plants in many Asian regions, make intervention necessary. Following slide. This might not apply specifically to Kazakhstan, but this just shows you with Southeast Asia, India, and China on the left, the average age of many coal plants in many parts of Asia are up to 3 decades younger than in the United States or Europe. So you've got, billion-dollar assets with a lot of useful life left. So that adds to the challenge. Next slide. So quickly, I'm running out of time, and I won't go through these slides in detail. Again, these slides will be shared, but we have some transaction models to bring in and incentivize private money to join us in these. We have an acquisition model, a synthetic model, and a portfolio model. Next slide. This shows the actual kind of a transaction structure that we're actually utilizing on a pilot transaction to recapitalize an independent power project and bring forward the PPA and shorten the life of the asset. Again, I won't go into the details. Next slide. And this shows kind of the top graph shows the cash flows from the business as usual case before the ETM transaction. And then the lower part shows the business case. The orange at the top is the debt repayment, and the blue is that's all the money going to the equity owners of the project. And in the ETM transaction, the green is the ETM loan, and it shows it repays the existing debt, and it allows the current owners of the plant to be relatively return neutral, yet bringing the end date of their plant forward by 7 or more years. Next slide. Here's an example of a funding vehicle. This is to promote the other side of the equation, replacing the coal power with cleaner energy sources. And it's a model where stapled financing and maybe concessional financing can be brought to bear to help lower the cost where necessary, and in countries and markets where that's necessary, to reach, to jumpstart and promote renewable energy, investment. So next slide. Next slide, please. Next one. So this is my last slide, just key policy measures and other measures for implementing ETM. It requires a government plan or commitment on no new coal or some kind of coal phase down. It doesn't make sense to use concessional capital and try to retire coal when there's, a lot more being built. And a power development plan towards clean energy is important because, of course, you have to replace
Recording
this
in
power.
progress.
So, and actually, working closely with the utility, you have to replace this power with something. So, and actually, working closely with the utility on grid studies and PPA negotiations is quite important. And I'll end by saying that, the ETM is a contributing factor to the Just Energy Transition Partnership in Indonesia, which my Indonesian colleague, Edo Mahindra, will be talking about next, as early coal retirement is one of the elements as part of that transition. But thank you very much for your time. I will stop here and thank you again for having me and allowing me to introduce this to you.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for a layout. You have shown the framework of the model of energy transition. I have a couple of questions to you before we continue. When we were studying your mechanism, we didn't quite understand why abandoning of coal stations will be good for owners. So when you were talking about the decommissioning, it can be seen from the slides that the question is about the evaluation of a company and the sales of the company. The company will be bought by a country fund for a fair price, and the station is supposed to function for 10 to 20 years more to pay out the money to investors. So the question, we have a question. When a station is evaluated or an energy block is evaluated before sales, so the owner may remain the manager after the sales or take the money and leave, but when we talk about evaluation, when you evaluate the cost, do you include the retraining of the personnel that will be losing their jobs? And the station, when it is decommissioned, it will touch upon society. You've seen our reports. We have big national stations, and very often in our country, cities develop around coal stations. So people are likely to suffer. So this is my first question, please.
Thank you. So quickly, couple points. The actual pilot transaction we're looking at in Indonesia, the owners of the plant aren't selling the plant. They look to continue to own the plant. But the plant's being recapitalized with lower cost debt due to the blending of concessional money. And what that allows is the plant can be retired earlier, but the return that the owners will earn is more or less the same. You know, they have a locked-in revenue stream out until 2042 via their power purchase agreement. And this transaction will shorten that period of time, but keep their return more or less neutral. And so that is meant to incentivize them to exit early. And, you know, owners could possibly sell the plant, but a lot of them opt to stay in and continue to operate under the new arrangement. So now regarding the retraining of personnel at the end, you know, we're not looking at entering a transaction and closing the plant the next day. The plant has to continue to operate for a number of years and repay back this loan with concessional funds, because then we can recycle those funds to use in other transactions. If we had unlimited concessional money, we could buy plants and shut them down. But you know, that may have implications for the grid or for the energy security or reliable supply of the country. And as you mentioned, for the communities themselves. So the idea is you're shortening the life of these coal plants, but they're still going to continue to operate for 10 more years, 12 more years. Every project would be different and specific based on the you know, the numbers and the financial revenue stream, and all of that needs to be calculated and evaluated. Now, as for the what happens to the employees, you know, every country has certain laws and requirements for, you know, when you close down a business, what kind of severance or other benefits do employees gain? And then we want to work with the country to on these plans. We have technical assistance funds available, but that's the next step, is when we actually look at real transactions, do an evaluation of the impacts of these transactions, and work with the government, whether it's the local government or the national government, you know, to anticipate these impacts and how to mitigate them, how to do some retraining and other aspects, you know, to address these impacts on the communities.
I understand your answer. Our miners are the most active out of all proletarians. So in 2016, the fair transition term appeared, and we saw Polish miners going on strikes. This is something we have to think about. And the second question, one of the instruments that interests us, you know, many of our companies in coal industry received from many financial institutions, including ADB, credits that may be called closed investments now. So when you document the buying, some of the credits are written off. Can you develop a little more? Can you build up a little more on this topic? Is my question clear to you?
When you mean credits, what? I'm not quite clear on the credits you're referring to.
Many companies in our country received credits or loans from international financial organizations before they undertook not to fund the further coal development. You know, and there are some agreements to write off some debts. So maybe such a mechanism may be applied. Basically,
I understand your question. You know, again, it'll be a case-by-case basis, project by project, plant by plant. But in this first pilot we're working on, we're actually going to refinance the debt. Our loan, our ETM loan, will repay existing debt, and then going forward, the project will repay our debt and close early. So I guess it'll have to look at the plant by plant how to accommodate that. But the idea is to replace our funding that which is lower cost because of blending the concessional funds to replace that earlier funding, and then renegotiate or enter into a new transaction or agreement where the project can be closed earlier.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I purposefully asked that question because we talked about countries promptly. Basically, we wanted just to clarify, besides many colleagues have not read your document. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And, we're happy to, discuss and dialogue in much more detail, going forward with your government and your companies and utility and so on, for this potential opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Next floor is given to Mr. Mahendra, Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs. So this is one of the most interesting. We are coming from theory to practice now. So what is convenient for you, to be seated or to stand, whatever you like?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I apologize, I'm going to speak in English. Thank you for inviting me from the ADB-Asian Development Bank and also ADBI-Asian Development Bank Institute. And also it's a pleasure that I heard previously from my colleague, Andy Jeffries. We've been working very closely. Andy is from the ADB and I'm from the government of Indonesia. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Edo Mahendra. I am the special advisor to the Minister on carbon pricing, and I'm also the head of Indonesia's Just Energy Transition Partnership, or JETP Indonesia. For this very great occasion, I would introduce a little bit about the Indonesia's Just Energy Transition Partnership, whereby the Energy Transition Mechanism, the ETM, that was presented by Andy a few minutes ago at the previous session, is an integral part of Indonesia's JETP. So I'm going to start. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to divide my presentation into 3 topics. The first one is to give a context, basically the overview and setup of Indonesia's JETP. Second, I'm going to touch upon the process and progress so far of Indonesia's JETP, and then the challenges and takeaways from JETP Indonesia. And this is very privileged to be here. Before we concluded the negotiation with the international partner groups, which is basically the G7 plus Denmark, Norway, and the European Union during COP27 in Egypt, I learned a lot from the first country that I'm from the first JETP country, which is South Africa. So I went to Cape Town and I learned from them. And then we had Indonesia's JETP as the second country. And then afterwards, Vietnam announced their JETP as the third country. Senegal was the fourth country, and we had a really good exchange between these countries. And this knowledge exchange has been very useful for us to make sure that we can get the energy transition right to do the energy transition that we need because each country has different challenges. Every country has idiosyncratic challenges. The challenges that are faced by South Africa, for example, is different from the challenges that Indonesia is facing. The same for Vietnam, also for Senegal. I'm going to, okay, so the first part, basically, I would like for everyone to give an explanation a little bit about the JETP. Indonesia's JETP was kickstarted with specific ambitions, principles, and outputs outlined in the joint statement. You can download the joint statement from the White House website, actually. And basically, the focus is on Indonesia's power sector pathway. So basically, we have an ambitious emission trajectories. That's the whole story of Indonesia's JETP. And these trajectories are conditional upon international support. So what type of international support that were pledged in this Indonesia's JETP? So we have two types of support. So in South Africa, it was 8.5 billion coming from public capital. That was from the G7 plus countries. For Indonesia, the leaders of Indonesia's JETP from the IPG are the United States and Japan. So initially, the pledge was 10 billion. And then this was leveraged. This was leveraged by the 7 financial institutions coming from the members of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ. 7 banks to leverage this 10 billion with another 10 billion. So hence we get this 20 billion of pledge, a combination of public and private that is basically that should be used for Indonesia's JETP journey. Again, the focus of Indonesia's JETP is the emission trajectory. We want to have this lowered with a clear pathway going forward, in line with our ambition, and then also very significant penetration of renewable energy in the energy mix in Indonesia, and also to give our best effort to accelerate or pull forward the net zero emission targets for the power sector. But again, there are some conditions that we have to meet here. One of the directives that I received from the minister is to make sure that the energy transition of Indonesia has to come out of the energy transition better off. So the condition that we will have after that should be contributing positively towards Indonesia's economy, and also to ensure that we can guard the energy affordability. Also, we need to guarantee the security, stability, the independence, and also the just transition aspects, because whatever changes, be it policy changes or the changes in the structure of the economy and the power sector and energy generation, normally it will create winners and losers. So we have to make sure that we mitigate the unintended perverse impact coming from the energy transition journey. And also we have to ensure the energy sustainability. And one important thing, because Indonesia's power sector is basically, utility sector is basically a monopsony and monopoly by our state-owned enterprise in the power sector, which is PT PLN. So we have to make sure as well that we maintain long-term financial sustainability for PLN and its subsidiaries. So what are the key outputs? So what we are preparing in Indonesia's JETP is basically investment requirements and opportunities to deliver on Indonesia's just energy transition. Second, we provide outline of policy recommendations that will be necessary to address any regulatory barriers in the energy and the financial markets to support investments in renewables. And third, development of outputs that were led by the government of Indonesia and with the support coming from the Secretariat. So this will be basically the content of the comprehensive investment and policy plan that the JETP will produce. Hopefully it will be launched before COP, and there will be some socialization during the COP28 in late November or early December in United Arab Emirates. So of course, everyone is invited to visit Indonesia's pavilion to listen to a series of Indonesia's JETP investment plan socialization. The CIPP is a living document which will be regularly updated and rejuvenated to reflect both internal and external development, and also hopefully the lower cost of technologies going forward for renewables and access to that. And this is how we structure Indonesia's just energy transition. So basically what we did is we separate the two layers. So we do not want the transaction level to be mixed up with the policy level, because it is important to ensure that policy is really at the sovereign authority of the government. So for this, we have the policy level should be negotiated or discussed between the government of Indonesia and our IPG partners. But for the transaction level, so here we basically try to minimize the transaction costs, especially the non-monetary transaction costs, which includes the search costs. We want to minimize this so that we can make it a bit more linked between the potential projects, project developers, and the financiers. Hence, this includes basically the 20 billion pledge coming from the coming from the IPG and GFANs. So the Secretariat is there in the middle, like a Chinese wall and a hub to basically to coordinate this. And we also created an ecosystem whereby we are supported by different working groups. Here we have 4 working groups: technical led by International Energy Agency, policy working group led by the World Bank, financing working group led by Asian Development Bank, which is also our institute, which is also providing the official institutional and knowledge partner for the Secretariat, and just transition is supported by the UNDP. After the first IPP is launched, we will focus next to the end use part of the energy transition journey of Indonesia. That is to focus on the energy efficiency and electrification. We have ambitious plan for this, and we would like to also invite everyone to invest in this energy efficiency journey. Next part, I'm going to discuss about basically about the process, how to make sure that everything is done in inclusive manner. So I would say that this is the first time in Indonesia that we are creating a plan that is really inclusive. Everyone, every hands on deck, which also includes not only international organizations, but also representatives from the civil society, especially those from the think tanks. So we have additional experts contribution within the JETP working group. So these working groups do not lead or produce the policy changes. This should be led by the government. However, the inputs are used by the Secretariat, so that I will decide to what inputs from them that will be the output coming from the Secretariat, which is the investment and policy plan. And then we have in-depth consultation with key stakeholders. We have like over 150 consultations, discussions, and we have public FGDs as well to make sure that the process is really inclusive and also transparent. Now, based on these outputs, we have so many outputs. I'm going to put a bit of a deep dive, a little bit of detail in the technical and policy, because these are basically, I won't go really into the details of this, but we are looking into the technical basically to calculate the emission trajectory, the generation, and the renewable energy mix along these pathways that we are optimizing. So this is a model-based exercise. The financing, basically, we are building all potential possible libraries or forms of financing, especially in the presence of both public and commercial capital in Indonesia's JETP. Policy reforms, we are focusing on 8 issues. I'm going to introduce 2 of those 8 issues here. And of course, also the aspect of the just transition here that is necessary, especially if we relate this to the early retirement of the coal-fired power plant. So what will be the investment themes of Indonesia's JETP? So these are the 5 investment focus areas that will be the content of our investment and policy plan that will be launched before COP. Number 1 is the development of the transmission network. So basically grid, we need to expand and upgrade the grid. As you know, Indonesia is isles. It's not contiguous island like the United States or Kazakhstan, for instance. So it's really difficult. So Transmission grid is very key in Indonesia, and for Indonesia, it's very clear. There will be no transition without transmission. So this will be one of the focus. Number 2 is the early retirement, early CFPP retirement, and the managed phase out. Now, this is the part where ETM comes very plays central role here. Number 3, 4, and 5 are basically the growth engines of the transition. So this is a rapid development of the renewables, both for the base load, hence the dispatchable renewables, also for the variable renewables, and we would also build because we would like to also have added value here. So we are going also to focus on the development of the manufacturing side of the renewable energy. In this case, one of the focus will be on solar PV. Now, I mentioned the 10 billion, the 20 billion package that was pledged in Indonesia's JETP. 10 billion is public money. This 10 billion, actually around 25% of this is the ETM money. So the one that was presented by Pak Andy Jeffries in the previous session. So basically ETM is a subset of this JETP. Hence, basically for investment focus area number 2, the engine is basically coming from ETM, ADB's ETM. And ADB is the one that is providing the highly concessional capital in order for the investment focus area number 2 to happen. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the some policies, because Indonesia's, given our vast endowments potential, both fossil fuel, God has given us lots of coal, but at the same time, we also have potential for renewables. So now we would like, again, to have a very rapid uptake of these renewables, then we have to do some changes. But these changes have to be done sequentially so we can have the transition that we need and the transition that we want. I'm going to touch a little bit on the local content requirement and the early retirement. For the local content requirement, so one of the instruction from the leadership in Indonesia is to have a strong domestic national capacity in manufacturing. So we have this LCR policy, but then again, normally these kind of things, we need careful calculations. So going forward, Indonesia will do some relaxation of the LCR so that we can revisit the LCR for key industries to even boost renewables, while at the same time we are making sure that the roadmap is clear so that going forward it's not about eliminating the LCR, but it's about to give the clear pathway so that our domestic industries after some time can reach the LCR aspirations set by the government. Number 2, we will also revise the existing regulations related to LCR towards loans that are highly concessional, be it from the development financial institutions or multilateral development banks. So this is the things that we are trying to resolve.
Sorry, your time is a little bit limited.
So, and then this is, I think, the one that is really important about early retirement, because this is about ETM. So again, several issues about regulations in Indonesia. We have to make sure that, for lack of better words, we cannot have anyone, Indonesia's policymaker, to go to jail because of early retirement. So this is very important because the track record of the Indonesia's board of directors of PT PLN are not very good. Many of them, after they retired, they went to jail because of things that are actually not really, could be contentious or like issues that are because of unclear aspects. So that's why for early retirement, because this is something new and we have to revise it, we have to make sure that there is a clear definition of what state loss is. Sometimes, someone can go to jail because it is deemed that it's created from state loss, even though it is a business decision made by the state-owned enterprise. So this thing, we have to make sure that policy changes is clear, there is compensation mechanisms, and also regulations that provide safeguard protection for our company, and also to make sure that it will not violate the debt covenant, because some of these assets are used as a debt covenant of the company. So now finally, what we can learn from this Indonesia Just Energy Transition is the economic growth imperative. Energy transition should not impede Indonesia's economic growth, and it has to provide affordable energy to the power for the Indonesian people. Number two, we cannot have PT PLN, our state-owned enterprise, to go bankrupt, because now Indonesia is an investment grade country. PLN is also an investment grade company because it is basically like practically it's a sovereign because it's guaranteed by the state. So we have to make sure that we keep this. We have to make sure that all these financial transactions do not hurt the financial sustainability of our state-owned company. Again, number three, archipelagic structure of Indonesia, which means that we cannot have aggressive renewables if we do not upgrade and expand our grid. Number four, is really important to have a political consensus to make sure that there is a universal buy-ins coming from different agencies and ministries in Indonesia. Final slide, I promise you, this is the final one. Some lessons that I can share with everyone here, with our Kazakhstan friends. First, there is no cookie cutter solution. Every country is different, the need is different. South Africa is having energy supply problem. Indonesia, initially we have some oversupply, at least for the next 2 or 3 years. So because every country has idiosyncratic issues, so we cannot 100% apply solutions. We just import. So we have to make sure that we tailor it to our need. Second, there is no silver bullet, no single universal technology that can solve this issue globally. And if you can reduce emission without creating more problems, so we should use it. Indonesia has a very massive industrialization now happening in the northern part of Indonesia that needs really energy intensive. So we have to have this combination of policy and technology mix. Number three, there is no such thing as free lunch. Please make sure, to my Kazakhstan friend, to make sure that whatever deal that you will have, make sure this is not business as usual. Something different comes to the table. Otherwise, it will just be the same. It will be just wasting your time. So make sure that you can get good deal. Make sure that there is something different before and after the deal. And then number four, please know your numbers. So this is very important so that we can make sure that these numbers are agreed by everyone. Everything is evidence-based, database, and be transparent and be open. And then in the end of the day, we can have numbers that are ambitious, yet at the same time workable, not something that is up in the sky then cannot be fulfilled or implemented in reality. That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope Kazakhstan can have a great ETM as well going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, let me invite our next speaker, Pramodi, Deputy Director from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me to explain about Indonesia energy transition, especially in power sector. Maybe I will explore more technical what Paido presented previously. Next slide, please. As we were, the climate change has become a global spotlight due to increasing evidence of its impacts on the world societies and environment. Even though Indonesia is not too big emitter for the CO2, but we are aware that Indonesia will get an impact because Indonesia is an archipelagic country. Based on the IPCC data, the climate change symptoms are getting stronger. The average global temperature has increased by about 1.1 degrees Celsius since the pre-industrial era, and is projected to increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius to 4.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the 21st century. And also the global sea level have risen by about 20 centimeters since the late 19th century, and they are projected to rise by another 26 centimeters to 82 centimeters by the end of 21st century. And the frequency and the severity of extreme weather events such as heat waves or drought and floods are increasing globally. The acidity of the ocean has increased by about 26% since the pre-industrial era due to the absorption of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Next slide, please. Indonesia is an archipelagic country with more than 17,000 islands, and it is vulnerable to climate change risks, such as a rising of sea level. From 2010 until 2018, national greenhouse gas emission experiences are growing, trend around 4.3% per year. And also from 1981 until 2018, Indonesia experienced increasing temperature of 0.0 degrees Celsius per year. And also Indonesia experienced a sea level rise about 0.8 until 1.2 centimeter per year, while approximately about 60% of the population lives in coastal areas. In 2002, per capita greenhouse gas emission in Indonesia reached about 2.2 tons of CO2 equivalent, representing a 2.7% increase from 2000. Greenhouse gas emission continue to rise at a slower rate than the GDP per capita growth, which has reached about 3.4%. Indonesia's potential economic loss can reach about 0.66% to 3.45% of GDP in 2030. Next slide. So that's why Indonesia already announced the enhanced NDC. It is more ambitious commitment in addressing of climate change. In 2022, the Indonesian government submitted the enhanced NDC to the UNFCCC with a more ambitious emission reduction by 2030. Our commitment, countermeasure 1, is to reduce the emissions 31.89% below the BIU in 2030. And with international support, we can reduce about 43.2% of emission below the BIU. For the energy sector, we targeted to reduce the emission with countermeasure 1 is about 358 million ton by 2030, and with countermeasure 2, we will be aggressive with 446 million ton by 2030. Next slide, please. Indonesia has the long-term vision to become a developed country at least in 2043. In the COVID previous years, our GDP is contracted about 2.07%. So to reach the target of get out from middle income trap, we have to grow about 6% GDP in average until 2045. So that's why, next slide please, that's why we need more electricity growth. Next slide please. Our electricity growth will be high year by year. In this slide, we can see the BAU scenario. BAU means that our electricity grow without a net zero emission target. And the second, IEA already forecast the Indonesian electricity demand until 2060. It will be growth about 4.2% per year, with a kilowatt hour per capita more than 500 kilowatt hour. And also we have another scenario with the 6% GDP growth based on the target of our Ministry of Development. So with the 6% GDP growth, we will need the electricity growth about 4.8% per year, and will be reached 5,600 kilowatt hour per capita in 2060. And if our economic growth more higher, about 7%, then our electricity growth will be more than 5% per year. If you see in the slide, in the right corner, the dominant of electricity demand is in industry, that mostly from the mineral industry. As you know, that Indonesia right now developing the nickel and cobalt smelter. The industry is support for the energy transition, to making the batteries, to making the steel, and energy storage. Yeah. Next slide, please. This is the information about our current condition for the electricity sector. What Paido said previously, our grid is not quite stronger. We are archipelagic country. The stronger grids right now is in Java Island. Java is the majority people is in Java. While in the eastern part of Indonesia, we have no grid actually. But right now, our smelter industry is growing very rapidly in eastern part of Indonesia. So that's why in the right corner, you can see the fossil fuel, especially coal, is quite dominant in our power generation capacity. So right now, our total generation capacity is about 86 gigawatt, while the fossil fuel about 85% share of capacity, while coal is about 48 gigawatt capacity. Next slide, please. That is our challenge, how to reduce the emission, how to reduce the CO2 emission. Our coal-fired power plant is tend to higher until 2060, because nowadays our smelter industry is still growing. To develop the smelter industry for the energy storage. In the right side, you can see that the emission will be tend to higher until 2060. It will be total 478 million ton, while the JP target, what Paido said the previous presentation, is about 290 million ton. So we have the gap emission in 2030 about 188 million ton, equivalent with reduction of 25 gigawatt of coal. That's our challenge, how to reduce the big amount of coal, while in other side we still need the growing of electricity to fulfill the demand of industry and also the other sector. Next slide, please. For a coal early retirement, we actually have some requirement. The first is the coal retirement is only after grid substitution is built. Early retirement for the coal-fired power plant is carried out only if the reliability of the system is guaranteed, namely if the replacement renewable power plant and or the addition of the transmission network has been operating. The second, have to assurance of the just transition, so there is no social impact from the early retirement of coal-fired power plant. The third is also the important aspect is affordable. Power generation cost is the same or better than the non-renewable energy alternative. And the fourth, I think the most important, is the confirmed international financial support. So all costs of the early retirement for coal-fired power plant, fire transition and replacement of the supply must be received the international financial support. Next slide, please. But before we get the international support, actually we already make our own effort, our best effort to do the carbon trading scheme in the power generation. So we set the target for each unit of our coal-fired power plant. If the coal-fired power plant has excess the emission based on the quota, based on the target, then the power generation should be by the CO2, should be doing the emission trading. The emission trading is a buying and selling transaction mechanism that cannot be carried out between generating units within the one entity. And also the power generation can do the emission offset. This is done by purchasing the emission reduction certificate issued by Ministry of Environment and Forestry, which come from energy sector emission reduction activities. The challenge is how to optimize the new and renewable generation inventory and energy efficiency, and to acceleration of the certificate of emission reduction that is issued by Ministry of Environment. And it is necessary to add emission validation and verification institution to accelerate the issues of the reduction certificate. Next slide, please. This is the scheme how to determine the emission quotas for the power plant. So the quotas is calculated based on the previous year of average emission. If data on emission intensity and average emission from the previous year are not available, then the emission quota is calculated proportionally by comparing power plants that have been operating for the same type, installed capacity and technologies. Next slide. Right now, we already collected data, the potential carbon trading participants in this year, about 99 participants with the capacity total about 34 gigawatt capacity. And next year, the participant for carbon trading will increase up to 144 with the equivalent with the capacity about 36 gigawatt of coal-fired power plant. Next slide, please. So the climate change financing needs to achieve the energy target. We already estimate the financial requirement to reach the unconditional NDC or 29% target in 2030 based on the third biennial update report. The total is about 4,000 trillion rupiah, or equivalent with 281 billion US dollar. In energy sector, we need about 245 or 246 billion USD. The mitigation for in energy sector is to build the renewable energy power plant and non-electric renewable energy, low carbon coal-fired power plant, city gas network and LPG conversion, and also energy conservation. Next slide, please. So in the summit of G20 in Bali last year, Indonesia already launched the Indonesia ATM country platform. The ATM main objective is how to optimizing the energy mix progression. 2 minutes, please. Okay. ATM main objective is to optimizing energy mix progression based on the national energy policy and to accelerate the early retirement coal-fired power plant. And the third is enhancing emission reduction in electricity subsector to achieve the NDC and net zero emission target. And the last is to boost our renewable energy power generation investment. Next slide, please. Indonesia already has the energy transition mechanism country platform. This is important to actually to implement the ETM. So we start with number one for the flow. Number one is incoming planning finance to the country platform through PTSME. The second floor is source of fund provides guideline for priority programs to the country platform manager. And the third, CP execute early return of progress process according to a roadmap. And then country platform will receive support from the Ministry of Finance for several finance scheme model. Then the five, mobilizing the CEF funds to transform coal-fired power plant to renewable by considering electricity supply business or RPTL. Six, ETM produce carbon credit for carbon trading. Seven, the ETM carbon credit is traded at the carbon market. And the last revenue cycle from the ETM comes in hand is managed by country income. The last slide, next slide, please. This is the ETM progress in Indonesia. ETM we has already ETM stakeholder coordination and consultation, and also the legal framework for ETM country platform. We already launching the ETM, and then the SESA development, CIF ACT investment plan, and also the ETM pilot project will be carried out for the ETM for Cirebon 1 with the capacity 600 megawatt, and also Pelabuhan Ratu project with the total capacity of 1.7 gigawatt. I think that's all my presentation because the limited time. Thank you for your attention. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Pramoender, for making it in time, for giving us an overview. Now I want to have a discussion. We have received information. I'm inviting to the panel the following experts. Jalgas Izzetelbaev, Investment Directorate. Kuanish Besingazin, Deputy Chair of Ministry of Economic Development, one of the designers of our low carbon strategy. Aygul Salavyova, Association of Ecological Organizations of Kazakhstan. And Janat, Financial and Commercial Expert. So today we have assembled experts from finance, environmental protection ministries, and the ones who designed the carbon neutrality strategy, and two more experts, our guests. Edo Mahendra, please. And Mr. Pamudia, I didn't ask you questions when you were having your presentation, particularly because I want to ask those questions in the course of the panel discussion. So let's make it a breathing discussion. So I have several questions myself, but I will leave them for a later period. I want to give the floor. I want to encourage you to exchange your impressions, observations, comments. So the first floor, let us give to Ms. Solovyova. Thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to express gratitude to the Asian Development Bank for inviting myself, for initiating such a platform and giving platform to listen to such wonderful presentations about energy transition mechanism, ETM. You know, a very clear cut algorithm we've seen today. We've seen concrete successes in the countries that introduced ETM. They are impressive. So on behalf of my association, which association knows what the climate change is and what are the upcoming problems are like, and taking into consideration the words of our president at the UN General Assembly, during which he said about the ESG principles introduction. So the interconnectivity of economy, ecology, and social issues is something that we need to introduce in Kazakhstan. Also, our president mentioned about water deficit. 5 million migrants will be traveling around the region of Central Asia. We will see expansion of deserts, degradation of land, environmental catastrophes, and people will be forced to move. 30% of layers in the mountains have been lost. And when we talk about energy transition, and I've heard a lot, and I'm under impression that the basic principles were put forward, that people, policy, and energy are the key priorities of ETM. And I like the fact that there are numerous consultations with the society, with the public sector, because experts are the people to voice many things that people in the ministries will not talk about. So Association of Ecological Organization is surprised by the fact that in our country we often talk about energy shortages, and our government, to my mind, are thinking about nuclear station, but they're not thinking about reserves we have already in place. First of all, we have Energy Efficiency Institute. Today in the presentation, there was a phrase, know your figures. So Energy Efficiency Institute can give us figures and we can know what we can save. Secondly, we have for more than 50 years, we have had 8 power plants that are obsolete. Our grid is obsolete. So if we manage to modernize at least 5% of our heat grid, that will equal the output of one nuclear station that we want to build in Kazakhstan. But if we refurbish 15% of the grid, that will be 3 nuclear power stations. So as association, we have calculated how many kilometers, how many losses we have, so we can take active part in energy transition. And another thing I wanted to talk about are subsidies. Subsidies are direct and indirect. We are using indirect subsidies, and in the world, 80% of subsidies are secondary ones, indirect ones, 20 are direct subsidies to keep the price energy at low level. Our Prime Minister signed the roadmap on the tariff generation process. Today, before lunch, I attended the Nobel Fest, and there a Nobel Prize winner said that can we use old knowledge and traditional approach to our life in future. So I think that the ETM mechanism will allow us to have the new vision on the transformations that will be taking place in our country. Otherwise, it will be too late. And today, Marat, you asked a question about coal stations, their decommissioning, social consequences, but we need to calculate. We need to calculate how much money we will spend when we have 5 million migrants and when we have water deficit. So today you've said that you are only beginning to design the feasibility study for ETM, but the country is undertaking to develop urban neutrality and green energy. So looks like we are not paying serious attention to all those things. Thank you. Well, let's give a big hand of applause to Ms. Solovyova. So in addition to your words about obsolescence of grids, reconstruction, etc., the Asian Development Bank are assisting us in the design of the law concerning heat supplies. And in the document, Jonat can tell us about the document. International experts attended 8 regions of Kazakhstan and audited the condition of our heat power plants. According to their calculations, reconstruction of the heat networks and stations in Kazakhstan will allow us to be compliant to targets of the Paris Agreement. Can you imagine how ineffective our heat energy is, how obsolete it is? So now I'm giving the floor to other panelists. Please speak for 2 to 3 minutes, not more. I'm addressing my compatriots. I'm reminding my compatriots that not every day we have foreign experts. So, Zhalgas Ministry, you're given the floor. Thank you very much. Yes, realistically, I wanted to first of all agree with the previous speaker, Ms. Solovyova. Today we are on the crossroads. These days, on one hand, we have taken liabilities, obligations. We are supposed to be compliant to the Paris Agreement. We must be neutral. At the same time, we possess abundant coal reserves in this country. And of course, it would be a sin not to avail ourselves of the coal. So today, as the governmental authority, we are thinking about how to match the two factors. Yes, today we have a roadmap on implementation about new tariffs and investments, and one of the main criteria in that program is to modernize our stations, is to overcome the obsolescence of the grid. The stations are supposed to reduce their hazardous emissions into the environment. We work closely with colleagues from the Ministry of Environmental Protection. Today they are preparing the inventory lists of hazardous emissions into the environment, based on which we will be thinking how to modernize our power plants for them to be compliant to those inventory lists and new requirements. This is fundamental activity, colossal activity, but at the same time, we as a socially oriented government must think about our citizens. We don't want to have an abrupt jump in our tariffs, which will be to the detriment of the heat system. You know, we always boast that in our country we have the lowest heat tariffs compared to the rest of the world. Well, this is the platform of our competitive advantage. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jalgas. You said that you want to match two factors together. I mean, coal. Indonesia has a lot of coal. And when I was preparing myself to today's session, I studied newspapers and what newspapers uh, write about Indonesia, particularly about ETM in Indonesia. And I saw one figure, 13 gigawatt of new capacities. The government approved construction of 13 gigawatt coal power plants in 21 to 30. Basically, in the east of Indonesia, they have new industries, and to support those industries, they need additional 13 gigawatts. Indonesia is on the same trail as China. I heard about the concept of dual carbon. I don't know what dual carbon is, and nobody explained to me what dual carbon is. It means that China took two obligations to achieve the peak of emissions by 2030, which means building new coal plants. But in 2060, we will be at a net zero. I haven't heard my Indonesian friends to say the same. You know, they will be building, but they will be decommissioning at the same time. So one of the active participants of the legislative process in the sphere of heat production and distribution. You're given 2 minutes. Please go ahead. Thank you very much, Marat. I echo the words voiced by my colleagues. We need the ETM mechanism urgently for Kazakhstan. I think we know we have stranded assets in Kazakhstan, the assets that are stuck, and we have a lot of stranded assets in this country because those assets, they have their own value, but Kazakhstan does not have mechanisms to expedite that value because using the cash flows generated from those assets, for those cash flows to be used to invest into the development of energy is not possible because we don't have mechanisms for the evaluation of those assets. We don't know how to sell assets. So to liberate capitals from those stranded assets. So we very much hope that the energy transition mechanism
We hope that the energy transition mechanism will help us in solving that dilemma. Also, one more thing that I wanted to add is that for Kazakhstan, it is probably very important to understand the fair value of coal energy. Ms. Solovyova has already mentioned that there are a lot of hidden subsidies for the energy assets. So the fair value, the fair cost of coal generation in Kazakhstan is unknown. That's one thing. And the second thing is that we don't have the mechanism now to estimate emissions, and that also could give us a better understanding of how expensive these coal power plants actually are. And then we will be able to fully appreciate the value of the energy transition mechanism. Well, you know, even green energy has the dark side that it needs to be supported by other generation. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Kanush Besinkazin, Deputy Chair of the Institute of Economic Research of the Ministry of Economy. At some point, when I was still an industrial person, we had heated discussions. And, you know, everybody is involved. The ministers, the governments, there are so many stakeholders. So how is it possible to overcome that whole lobby, industrial lobby, because we should have done the calculations, right, to see how much actually the subsidies are contributing as cheap energy, cheap heat, and so on. That's actually another support measure. Thank you for giving me the floor. I think that this ATM mechanism is indeed important for Kazakhstan because the ambitious goals that we've set are very difficult to achieve, especially from the standpoint of finance. We've calculated that 610 billion US dollars will be needed until 2060. That is just the preliminary numbers, at least 10 billion till 2030. And also given that the Ministry of Environment has now developed an NDC, draft NDCs, only to achieve those commitments, we need about 5.4 billion US dollars. We also looked at the resources that are aimed at the climate issues. It's about over 2 billion in Kazakhstan. So there is a gap of about 3.5 billion US dollars till 2025. So there are significant financial issues here. And this mechanism indeed could help in raising finance with good conditions for these capacities. As our colleagues from Indonesia have mentioned, some of the assets could be quite new, and it's more challenging to decommission those. That's not an issue for Kazakhstan because our assets are old. So out of 37 CHPs, more than 29 have worked for many years, and the depreciation there is at least 50%. So we have a lot of projects to choose from. We just need to participate actively. Last year, when the strategy was being developed, we worked with the ADB quite actively, and we've included this mechanism in the strategy. So there shouldn't be any issues from the standpoint of the government. We just need to be working actively. We need to do the audit of facilities. We need to find the most obsolete ones and start from there, and then continue active cooperation. And also another thing that we need to take into account is that the money is finite. The ADB will also have their own limits, and other countries will be interested in this fund. So we needed to act quickly to use this chance to resolve our problems. Thank you. I remember this constant issue. At some point, there was an electric energy development program till 2030. It was developed at the end of 90s. And there was a statement there saying that since our energy, since we have a lot of surplus in energy generation, then it makes no sense to consider building new plants by 2030. At that time, that was this thinking. But now we can see how erroneous that statement was. At the time, no one thought we will need more. So now we have a lot of questions whether we need to refurbish the existing ones or build the new ones. And there are trade-offs, of course. Now, let us start the discussion with our guests. And one of the first questions that comes to mind, and that was already mentioned here, how were you able to overcome different lobbying efforts in your country? Because for us, even 15% is a big challenge. And you said, what, over 40%? And of course, with support or without support measures, but still the numbers are quite ambitious, quite impressive. So how were you able to reach that national consensus? Anyone can take that question from Indonesia, please.
Thank you. Yeah, about the how to achieve the NDC target in our national electricity company, called it PLN. They will develop more renewable, consists of hydro power generation, geothermal, solar, wind, and also a bit of biomass. Actually, that's already planned in the existing of power development plan. While the coal-fired power plant generation is only the what we call it, only the committed project, but some of them cannot continue to develop because they got some obstacle to achieve the financing. So basically, the target to achieve the target is we will build more renewable until 2030 is about 20 gigawatt of renewable will be developed in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question, and then we will move to taking questions from our panelists and from the audience. I have the following question. In your presentations, you have mentioned the local content requirements. Is that about also localizing the manufacturing? So are you working on localizing the manufacturing of, let's say, renewable components and also on processing? So please. If you could turn off the microphone, then the other one will turn on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So for the CR, it is the instruction coming from the president that as part of the economic added value strategy of the Indonesia going forward. So one of the strategy is to have heavy reliance on the domestic national industrialization, and this includes the local content requirement coming from also for the power sector, one of them, and also this also is not that's not the only tool. There is also other tools. For instance, like the reason why we ban our critical minerals, because Indonesia is quite blessed by having an endowment of some very it's called central critical minerals for the battery industry, for instance. This is because we have the aspirations that we want to stop the we want to make sure that our economic complexity is getting more complex going forward, because we realize to get this aspiration Pra mentioned, our aspiration to graduate to a high income economy by 2045, we need to have more added value in our economic. So which means we have to have more complex economic structure going forward. So that is one of the aspirations. But we do realize that some of the numbers may be a bit too optimistic in the beginning. So because we have this energy need as well, so we want to rationalize, to recalculate the LCR for some of the renewables going forward. So for instance, give you an example, the one that we just revised this month is for the solar PV. So initially we have the 60% local content component. Now we reduce this to by 20 percentage point to 40%. And that is for the LCR. I would like to add a little bit on the NDC. So that what was presented, it was the total. It's not only for the energy sector. So we are quite blessed that we have the positive net sink coming from the forestry, forestry and other land uses. So which actually in the end of the day, it might be the one of the savior of our NDC ambition, including for the unconditional target.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so dear panelists, any questions? Aygul wants to ask a question. I've seen in your slides, you have mentioned new technologies. So what about carbon capture and storage? What share does it take in your strategies? And if yes, to which extent? And second thing, there is now a lot of discussion about hydrogen, but in our country, there is a deficit of water. And is hydrogen production something that would be acceptable to your country? And have you looked into it?
Thank you for the question. Very good question. About the CCS, we are looking forward for the commercial of the CCS for power generation. We are thinking now to continue utilize the, just for optional, we can continue to utilize the coal for the coal-fired power plant, but we have to add the CCS technology. And also, we are aware that with CCS will still remain about 10% of emission. So we need to co-firing with biomass, maybe about 10%. So the emission will be net zero. And for the hydrogen, actually, we are right now finalizing our national electricity planning. We are plan to use the hydrogen for the gas turbine. Actually, we know that Japanese right now make the research and will be commercial in 2045 for the 100% hydrogen combustion in the gas turbine. So we are make the option to continue use the gas turbine power generation and will be utilized 100% of hydrogen. And where is the hydrogen coming from? It will be coming from hydro power generation in our eastern part of Indonesia, in Papua. We have about more than 30 gigawatt hydro potential there, but the demand is very low. So we're thinking to utilize the hydro to produce the green hydrogen, maybe beyond 2035 for the commercial. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that there are some questions in the audience. Let's give them the opportunity. Go ahead. Ministry of Energy. This is a very interesting session and very interesting presentations. I would like to thank all our speakers and thank the organizers. My question is as follows. So basically, the statements that I had in my mind were already noted by our speakers, by our panelists. Overall, in Kazakhstan, as it was already mentioned, we've got a lot of potential to reduce emissions by improving efficiency in transmission systems, distribution systems, both for electricity and heat. The only difference, I would say, between our systems and Indonesia's system is our different climate, because in Kazakhstan we have very cold winters, and our power plants produce not only electricity but also heat. And that is crucial for the population living around those power plants. And I think it's a well-known fact that our heat and power plants are basically high-efficiency plants. Well, them being old is, of course, another matter. But I have a question to our colleagues from Indonesia. You've mentioned that you had over 150 different consultations with different partners. So have you seen any mechanisms where ETM was used for, let's say, some kind of gradual application of the emission reduction approaches, starting maybe first by improving efficiency? Because my thinking is that we need to first gain something through adding efficiency and then switching the sources. So in your consultations, have you seen any successful cases of achieving that through improving efficiency? So gradually, first energy efficiency and then replacement.
Immediate answer.
Please.
Thank you for the question. So the over 150 consultations that we had, it is for the JETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership, whereby the ETM is a subset of those. Now ETM has already the SIF Act already has the very robust SESA as well, socioeconomic assessment. Yeah, and the focus of the ETM is mostly for the time being is for the early retirement of our CFPP, but for the on-grid. So I think the moderator mentioned about the Indonesia's bill for the planning to build this double-digit gigawatts capacity of coal that is off grid. Now, for the ETM, the focus is on the on grid. Now, I think you can see in my presentation that after the first investment plan is launched, that will be before COP28. After that, we will establish the fifth working group, which will focus on energy efficiency. So at that time, during the negotiation, at the time I was also the one of the co-lead negotiators for Indonesia's JETP. And coming from Indonesia, our position was initially to offer to our IPG counterparts, the G7 and plus 3 countries, including EU, we mentioned that we would also like to embark to look into the energy efficiency, because we believe that we could also save a lot from energy efficiency. However, at that time, it was turned down. So basically because, let's focus on power sector first. It's not because it's like we want to focus, but then come a year later, this happens actually like in October or September 2022. So like 9 months later, so when I met my counterparts coming from the US and Japan as the co-leaders, and then they met me in my office and they said, hey, Edo, it seems like the energy efficiency is not a bad idea. It's actually good to focus on this. But then we only have a few more months left to finalize the investment plan. So that's why the document is a living document. And going forward after this, we will focus on the energy efficiency as one of the tools, especially to look at the end use sectors. This includes, of course, EV, the infrastructure for EV, green hydrogen, and the heavy industry, including hard-to-abate industries. We need to map those, and then we believe that this can unlock potential capital coming from the private sector, because there are so many people actually want to decarbonize, but sometimes the search cost is too high. So this is what we want to minimize, so that we can have a more rapid decarbonization where everyone can take place. Because if it's only power sector, it's the big players. So, and we have a monopoly in our utility sector, right? But if we go towards energy efficiency, every Indonesian can play a role going forward. So this is the plan, and hopefully we can follow this plan for our second investment plan next year.
Thank you, Edo, for this detailed response. I think your answer satisfied the person who asked the question. It's actually great when you decided to go back to energy efficiency idea. Okay, any other questions from the audience, please? Hi, distinguished guests, distinguished participants of the session. I'm Almas Sohim of Karem company. I have a question actually to Kuanish Bisingazin. As far as I understood, you said that you have worked on the matter with the Ministry of Environment, and there was an understanding that about 2 billion of investment could be attracted to decarbonize our economy. So my question is as follows. You also mentioned that there are no issues with the CHPs. Some of our colleagues have mentioned here that like modernization could be done, and that no problem with selection of candidates because of plants. But again, going back to the idea of our harsh climate, so what type of investment are we talking about? Is that investments to build new CHPs in big cities? And if we're not able to do that, how will we be able to provide heat in northern cities? Do you have anything to add?
I'm not very sure that this question should go to our Indonesian friends. Well, I'm addressing it to Kazakh colleagues. Well, this question is broader than today's topic. We are talking about the ETM and not lose on the assets. So what do we need to do with the heat energy in this country? Of course, we have severe climate, and based on that, in the past, socialist Kazakhstan and Soviet Union built the centralized heating system. But today we must realize, is it really so that the centralized heating system is compliant to modern trends? Maybe we should decentralize ourselves by using alternative and renewable sources of energy. This question is very topical and nobody has given a more or less clear answer. There are some good examples. For example, Norway, they don't have centralized heating system. They also have severe climate, but they also have alternative and renewables. So we need to do a lot of thinking about that. Yesterday, the Vice Minister of National Economy made a speech here and he reminded us about the roadmap on the implementation of the carbon neutrality strategy. So yes, in there we are supposed to give answers to questions, many questions, including yours questions. Where we will install renewables, at which particular stations, what is the future, how many renewable sources we need, what will we do with water, what are we going to do with the big water power plants. This is a whole directory of thousands of questions, a very complicated task, but without that, my mind, decarbonization and carbon neutrality are priorities. Kwanish, this is not only your opinion. I think when they were designing the heat distribution law, they had a lot of discussions and disputes and arguments. Today we have Janat from ABD. Maybe we need to, renewables in the heating industry in this country exist already. They are installed in small capacity boiling stations. So the thing is, I was the first one who opposed the renewables in the past. I said we had severe climate, etc., etc. So Indonesian colleagues have told us that they are carefully studying the experience gained by Japan, how they are transitioning. So next question, please. We still have 5 to 7 minutes. The coffee break was postponed. Okay, the last question, and then we will have a coffee break. And there we can discuss things in lobby. So if the audience doesn't have, I have a question to colleagues. So I like, when I was studying the funding plan, the PLN is a monopolist in electric energy, something like Samruk and Kigok altogether. 38% of investments come from the government, plus they receive 25% from the country fund. So when we were designing our strategy to carbon neutrality transition, it was said that the first effect from transition would be the growing GDP, and secondly, the government would participate to 3% only, almost no burden on the government, only private investments. Private investments include our foreign partners. So the government that took those obligations today is staying aside, only 3%. So this question still is open. So maybe we need to readdress that mechanism, because if the government does not act today, we might have problems. Likewise, we had problems with shutdowns in western provinces. We had heat collapse in the north last winter. So let us think about it. So the question is about the role of the government, the ETM. allows, when we create the country fund, the country platform, you know, in Indonesia, they have 17 organizations and shareholders plus mandatory participation of the government, 25%, if I'm not mistaken. So if our Ministry of Finance enters the ETM initiative with 25%, that mechanism can work autonomously. So let us take a coffee break and let's take a photo together with the guests. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So all participants are invited to the coffee break. The second session will be in 15 minutes. It will be about Kazakh ETM, where we will offer the list of stations. Thank you, Dina, for introducing myself. Good afternoon, dear participants of the session. There's not many of us here, and I know that some people probably will be late, so I hope this session will be useful not only to international participants but Kazakh experts. First of all, I wanted to extend cordial gratitude to KazEnergy and ABD for a very interesting topic. We are about to discuss energy transition mechanism. This is a quite new approach which is being discussed not only in Kazakhstan but other countries of the region. So to my mind, I've been dealing with renewable energy for 14 years now, and I take part in various energy transition processes inside Kazakhstan, so I can tell that there are several positions in regards to the future of energy in Kazakhstan. But in the last 2 to 3 years, nobody argues that energy transition is a part of our today's Kazakh reality. Nobody argues that we need to diversify our energy, that we need to renew our infrastructure, not only because the climate changes are taking place and not only because the energy transition is a global process, but because we need to renew the infrastructure, generating sources, apply new solutions, digitalization. So we have to talk about hydrocarbon neutrality to be achieved by 2060. That issue has been in discussions for many years. In February, we adopted the document which is called Strategy for Achievement of Carbon Neutrality. So this is an official state document, regulating document for us today. We must understand what is the role of the energy sector and what is the place of the energy sector in that transition. Energy must transform from the standpoint of energy carbon neutrality. First of all, in the last 10 years, we've seen the development of renewable energy, a very good start, a very good progress. We've seen commissioning of new sources, and we are seeing reduction of energy deficit. At the same time, for the grid operator and for the grid companies, the integration of renewable sources is a challenge for the resolution of which companies must not only modernize their infrastructure but also change their work approaches. Still, 70% of our generation is based on coal that does not allow to perform the big scale introduction of renewables. So with happiness, but with certain concerns, we are watching the process of renewable energy development today. Various agreements are being signed. Today, our parliament is ratifying a number of documents. But at the same time, we must remember about being pragmatic and energy mix. So the second thesis I wanted to say that the the decisions we're about to make today, they will influence what will happen situation 10 years from now on. So not only from the standpoint of security and economic feasibility are we supposed to do that. We must take into consideration environment and social processes. We need to have a clear approach, a clear plan that will help us to perform that energy transition. So ETM, our today's topic, is something that we need to understand. Do we need it? How do we implement it? And how will ETM influence the energy system? So in the first part, I want to give the floor to our experts for their main report with the primary results of research on energy transition, and allow me to introduce our speakers. Bigjan Mukatov, National Consultant of Energy Sector of ABD. Before ABD, he was the senior dispatcher of the Central Dispatch Center of KIGOC. He has a rich professional experience. He is the designer of software for energy systems and is a copyright owner for some of them. He is a PhD, and his research is about the influence of renewables on energy sector. Co-speaker today will be in the online regime, George van der Gaug, Carbon Trust, United Kingdom consultant of Asian Bank of Development. George has extensive experience from various countries, investment experience, investment into renewables, decommissioning of fossil fuel stations. Also, George has experience from teaching in the sphere of economy and business. He trained people in the sphere of data processing in KMG and in Carbon Trust. So first, I would like to give the floor to George, and then Begjan will proceed. George, you are given the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Can I confirm you can hear me okay?
Yes.
You can hear me? Great.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Yes, my name is George Moores van der Gaug. I'm a senior manager at the Carbon Trust in the Energy Transition team, and I've been working with ADB on this pre-feasibility study. I'm also here with Bigjan Mukatov, who's just been introduced, who's our kind of consultant in Astana, our consultant in the room with you today. So this session is to take you through the pre-feasibility ETM study that's currently ongoing in Kazakhstan. This is the very first step of the ETM process, as we've talked about in earlier sessions. And it's looking at the best early opportunities to transition from coal to clean power in Kazakhstan. Next slide, please. So as a brief agenda, so we're going to set some objectives for the session. I'm going to give a bit of an introduction to the pre-feasibility study itself and what it entails. We'll give an overview of some of the insights from the policy and regulatory report that Bigjan has been leading on. And then we'll look at some of the preliminary findings of our multi-criteria analysis, or what I'll call MCA from now on, of Kazakhstan's coal fleet. Next slide, please. So just to set some objectives for the session to align expectations, we're going to give you an overview of the pre-feasibility study in terms of its purpose, approach, and where we are in that process. We're going to give you some initial insights, including kind of the challenges, recommendations from the policy and regulatory environment assessment that we're doing as part of the study. And we'll give an update on ongoing process and next steps as part of the pre-feasibility study. Next slide, please. So I wanted to introduce you to the consultant team. It's a broad team across geographies. So first we have the Carbon Trust, which is a global team of environmental and sustainability experts. We seek to accelerate organizations' journeys towards net zero. We're a mission-driven organization and have provided technical advisory work on the energy transition internationally. And we're led by our director, Andrew Lever, who's based in Scotland. We also have Climate Smart Ventures, or CSV, who are our financial partners on this project. CSV is a transition and transaction advisory firm with a track record for bringing together the region's leading power asset owners, debt and equity providers, ESG investors and experts in accelerating South and Southeast Asia's energy transition in a just, orderly and competitive manner. The team is led by Lawrence Ang, who's the managing partner based in Manila. Finally, last but not least, we obviously have our technical consultant and ADB team member, Bekjan Mukatov. He's the technical consultant on the team and is based in Astana. Next slide, please. Thank you. So to give a very brief overview of what the pre-feasibility study entails, there are 6 key stages in the form of 6 reports. We're about halfway through the study, having produced reports for 1, the inception report, 2, the policy and regulatory report, and 3, the MCA or multi-criteria analysis. And we are yet to undertake reports 4, which is the financial analysis, reports 5, which is the terms of reference for a full feasibility study, and then finishing with a final report that encapsulates all the previous studies. We're aiming to have the reports finished and finalized by mid-December this year, and we will share all of those with you. So you can see on this slide, we've got the key objectives, outputs, as well as which consultant is taking the lead on each of those reports. So the Carbon Trust and myself project manage the project in its entirety. We also lead on the inception report, the MCA, the terms of reference, and the final report. Bekjan is leading on the policy and regulatory report, report 2, and our partner CSV are leading on the financial analysis, which is report 4. So just to whiz through each of them. The inception report is the very first study and is kind of the mobilization piece of work where we outline the purpose, objectives, scope, and remit of the study. The policy and regulatory report, led by Bekjan, looks at the key challenges, makeup of Kazakhstan's energy landscape, and starts to make some policy and regulatory recommendations for Kazakhstan to transition away from coal and towards clean energy. The MCA, or multi-criteria analysis, that's conducting a high-level screening and prioritization exercise of power plants that represent the best opportunities for an ETM in Kazakhstan. CSV then conducted the financial analysis, which looks at the expected costs under different scenarios of retirement. The terms of reference is a key piece of work. It allows us the opportunity to outline the next steps for the ETM, because as I mentioned, this is only a very first step in this piece of work towards achieving an ETM or opportunities under an ETM. And the full feasibility studies allows us to define what needs to happen next. And then finally, the final report kind of wraps up all our policy recommendations with a roadmap, and we're aiming to deliver that in December. So I'm now going to pass over to Bekjan, who will present some of the key insights, findings, and recommendations from the policy and regulatory report. Bekjan, over to you.
Thank you, George.
Within the framework of the analysis of regulatory policy, we analyzed the opportunities that the existing legislation gives for us to make sure that coal power plants be decommissioned as soon as possible with minimal impacts on the society, So we want to ensure the most effective transition from coal generation to cleaner generation. So in addition to the analysis of the existing legislation, we analyze the existing energy landscape, including the technical compound of the energy system, and we studied the options for potential funding of the energy transition mechanism introduction in Kazakhstan. We studied the existing markets of electric energy, existing capacities. We had interviews with stakeholders and all those concerned. In brief, we can report the following results that were acquired in the course of preparation of the report. So we can emphasize that Kazakhstan undertook very good obligations. We see some positive dynamics. Kazakhstan has ambitious targets and goals to increase the share of renewables in its energy balance. Those are quite ambitious targets. And I must emphasize that I've never seen a more detailed program and plan of achievement broken down by years.
And given that Kazakhstan, due to its peculiarities, is very dependent on the coal generation in the matters of heating, we also wanted to point out that for the existing coal power plants, there are some excessive preferences which also prevent from more active development of renewable energy sources. Since there are no clear plans by the years, while there are still ambitious goals on achieving carbon neutrality, we expect that in the next decades, investments into renewables will not be sufficient to achieve these targets. On a technical side, it was already mentioned that the coal generation plays a very important role in power system and also in heat supply. And also year to year, the demand for electricity grows. Since 2020, we are seeing a decrease in peak generation, which in turn increases this gap between supply and demand. And this deficit of capacities right now have to be compensated by importing energy from Russia. Also, it's well known that there is quite a challenging situation in central heating area. We are seeing more heating power plants breakdown. That also is a kind of a barrier preventing from large-scale decommissioning of coal power plants or transition to renewables. On this slide, you will see three main areas. So basically the barriers that we see are broken down into three groups. First, these are technical issues. It was already noted that there is a high dependence on coal generation in the energy mix. Overall, in the whole energy infrastructure, we are seeing that there is a high level of failures and breakdowns in the sector, as well as many facilities being obsolete. Also, there are some technical limitations, namely the fact that the western zone of Kazakhstani grid is isolated, and also the renewables increase further the deviations in the energy system, which are a barrier in itself. In terms of the market barriers, we could mention that historically in Kazakhstan, there were some contradictions between the market rules and the mechanism for price regulation in the electricity market. So there are some direct contradictions between these two objectives. Also, we could note that there are risks for investors into renewables related to tariffs, especially that is relevant in the conditions of transformation of the electricity market, which we are now witnessing in Kazakhstan, and also due to technical issues on the balancing, as it was noted before. We could note that there is a reduction of investment into renewables because Kazakhstani energy system is not able to integrate significant amount of renewables because of its intermittent nature. In terms of the political aspects, so we could point out that historically in Kazakhstan, there were no clear plans and analytical work done to support the plans to reduce coal generation and transition to renewables. Also, in our opinion, there is insufficient economic analysis of the process, including economic analysis of the energy sector development as a whole. This needs to be somehow evidenced by the economic feasibility. Also, another important matter is that there are challenges in complying with the environmental, ecological goals and ambitions and linking those with the plans for commissioning new generation and decommissioning old ones. While there are also the matters of supporting the population, the energy sector workers, and everyone who could possibly be affected by the energy transition. As a recommendation for Kazakhstan, we could note two main areas. First, it's activities aimed at risk reduction, investment risks, renewable development risks, and decommissioning of coal generation. So, for instance, methods like the contracts for difference, they are used in the UK and Netherlands. So there, the difference in price for energy output can be covered if the price on the market goes below the one that is feasible or profitable for a facility, in this case, coal power plant. There are also preferential tariffs or feed-in tariffs that are identified in advance so that the entities could ensure that they're getting the benefits. Kazakhstan has already used these feed-in tariffs, but it's just one of the ways that we are mentioning here. And next is the intellectual expert guarantee. Kazakhstan is also working in this direction. They are now preparing the legislative framework to create and subsequently to scale up the household level generation sources that are solar panels for the households so that the consumers themselves could also sell the electricity to the grid, and that would also provide additional incentives for this sector. Direct activities that are aimed at incentivizing this energy transition could include things like incentives for using renewables in the heat sector. So there could be a study of feasible and optimal solutions that could be used as an alternative in Kazakhstani conditions. Basically, heating systems can already be a hybrid. There are more and more discussions now about moving away in some specific cases from centralized heat supply so that individual districts or maybe even the whole towns could use distributed solutions using renewables. Also, the main idea of the second item is the auctions 24/7, basically, so that the renewables could have opportunity to trade at any time. Using the example of Kazakhstan right now, there are adjustments of the daily schedules, for instance, and there are limits to changing scheduled generation for a renewable facility in a certain period of time. And also tax benefits. This could be the benefits provided to power plants who will undergo this transition. So this could be direct tax benefits. Here you will see some of the latest examples of the mechanisms that are used in the world to incentivize the early decommissioning of coal generation. For instance, Germany last year has adopted a law on reducing and stopping energy generation at coal power plants. The main idea and the main instruments for this accelerated transition is basically they allow participation of the coal generation in the so-called reversive auctions, where the coal generation can get compensations for early retirement or early decommissioning in part or in full of their coal assets. In the first 5 auctions that were done in Germany, the amount of investment, the amount of trading there at the auction was about 700 million euro of compensations, which turned out to be a better alternative than other ways to decommission coal generation in Germany. In the US, they use the securitization tool through tariff plans. The main idea is that a facility or a company can use bonds that will be issued and repaid through the payments of the users. So this reduces the burden, and this allows to repay the existing debts. An example of New Mexico, in 2019, they allowed to use this securitization, and local utility company issued bonds with amount of 361 million US dollars. And that tool allowed to save about $80 million in the same year. Another example is Chile. In this country, they use carbon credits. They are provided to the owners of the assets that reduce their generation, and by doing so, they reduce their emissions, CO2 emissions. And in this way, basically, the CO2 emissions that were prevented can be then sold. In December 2020, Chile company ADBI Energy signed a 12-year contract with amount of 125 million US dollars to build a wind power plant and to decommission 2 blocks, 2 units of coal generation, 125 megawatt each. The creditors paid minimal price for carbon because that price was reduced by through introduction of renewables. And in the period of this loan, it's expected that there will be a reduction by 5.16 million tons of CO2. Of them, over 2 million tons will also be accompanied by getting loans through the Clean Technologies Fund with a total amount of about 6.5 million US dollars. So basically, that gives us about $3 per ton of carbon. So that's all I had on my side, and I give the floor back to George.
Thank you, Bekshan. So I'm now going to spend some time taking us through the detail of our MCA or multi-criteria analysis, including our approach, structure, and initial findings. This is a complex assessment, but I've tried to simplify this over a couple of slides. So in terms of our approach to the MCA, the purpose of it is to carry out a high-level screening of Kazakhstan's fleet of coal plants to identify and rank them in order of priority for early retirement in the context of an ETM. This is to identify the best candidates. Sorry, can you jump back one more? Yeah, thank you. This is to identify the best candidate plants to target and engage with first as part of the MCA. So to do this, we've developed a framework to score and rank plants to highlight those best candidates. We provide high-level insights on the types of plants that can be considered for early retirement in terms of their age, utilization, size, and other metrics, and given the local energy context of Kazakhstan. We also use this analysis as a platform for engagement with other stakeholders across Kazakhstan's energy system, and have been doing that since the outset of the project. So finally, we also test our results and test plants that can be considered good candidates for an early retirement for an ETM, based on our findings, insights for this report, but also leveraging and utilizing our lessons learned from doing a similar process in other countries, in other energy systems. Next slide, please. So to give you an insight into the structure of this, we structure the MCA across 4 pillars, and those are energy security, financial viability, environmental impact, and just transition, which has been mentioned before. So the reason for focusing on these 4 pillars is we want to attempt to capture some of the important complexities of transitioning from coal to renewable power, and capturing some of the complexities presented in Kazakhstan's energy system specifically. So broadly, the MCA looks to prioritize plants that are going to have a low impact on energy security, recognizing the importance of maintaining a reliable and stable grid. It will look to prioritize plants that demonstrate strong financials, so they can be considered investment worthy under an ETM. We'll also prioritize plants that have high environmental impact, such as high emissions. And finally, last but not least, we want to prioritize plants that are going to have a low impact on the local economy and local livelihoods. Next slide, please. To go into a bit more detail on how the scoring and ranking actually works across those pillars. So again, it's a complex process. We have 4 pillars and about 40 metrics that sit below each of those. And there are broadly 4 key stages we use to approach this. The first, we conduct a macro analysis of Kazakhstan. Now, this is a country level assessment across the 4 pillars and about 20 of those metrics to determine the extent to which we believe Kazakhstan is ready to transition from coal at the national level. This assessment then informs what weightings we apply to each metric and each pillar. This is later applied to the plant level analysis and flexed to create different scenarios, which I'll show you shortly. For the sake of this research, we call this macro analysis dimension A. Dimension B then is the plant level analysis. This begins by developing metrics for each pillar, including things like plant size, utilization, efficiency, age, location, financials, etc. Where we're unable to collect specific plant data, we have made assumptions based on academic papers we've reviewed, studies we've reviewed, as well as creating different plant archetypes with the data that we do have. These plant archetypes are determined by using averages across 2 different metrics, plant size and plant age. Once we have our plant level metrics, data and assumptions, we generate scores for each plant across each pillar. These scores are between 0 and 1. 0 means we think this plant is not a good candidate for a transition under an ETM, and 1 being the highest score, we think it's one of the best candidates and therefore highest priorities for transition under an ETM. Plant scores are then multiplied by the weightings of each pillar, which I'll show you on the next slide, to give a total plant score across pillars. So again, those pillars were energy security, financial viability, environmental impact, and just transition. Plant scores and rankings are then reviewed and tested, and we go through a few layers of this to test for different sensitivities. And we're currently in that process at the moment. So the results I'll show you next are very much preliminary results. Next slide, please. So we did want to show an early view of our analysis, although I'll caveat again that these are preliminary results and scores, and we're still going through the process of reviewing them. So of 26 plants considered in the analysis, these were the top 10, as well as with their scores under two different scenarios. You can see these two different scenarios at the top, one where all pillars were weighted equally, and the second scenario where we've weighted each pillar based on our dimension A, our macro level analysis, to represent the relative importance we see for each pillar in Kazakhstan. Although broadly, you'll see that actually, despite some shifting in the ranking, particularly the top 5 don't change that much. So for those less familiar with the characteristics of some of these plants, broadly the MCA has identified and prioritized plants that are smaller, older, have medium power utilization and relatively low heat utilization. They have relatively fewer direct workers, relatively high emissions, and are often located away from densely populated areas. So interestingly, our 4 CFPPs, so coal-fired power plants, rather than our CHPPs, didn't make the top 10 list in either scenario. Although we believe this is mostly driven by the fact that some of these CHPs have low heat utilization, and the CFPPs in question are often quite large and therefore considered to have a high impact on energy security if they were to be retired early under an ETM. There'll be more details of this in our full MCA report once we have finished the project. Next slide, please. So I guess just to make some closing remarks and a comment on the next steps of this project. Transitioning any energy system away from fossil fuels is complex, and we've seen this across geographies. There'll often be competing objectives, but targeting coal-fired power plants to retire early while promoting the build-out of renewables, as we've discussed, should always be 2 key priorities. We know that a reliable heat supply is critical for Kazakhstan. I think that was mentioned in the panel discussion before. But there are renewable energy solutions out there, again, as mentioned earlier, in Scandinavian countries and elsewhere that have similar climatic experiences to Kazakhstan. The ETM does represent a key opportunity for financing this transition, and the pre-feasibility study is the very first step in that process. We're still conducting our research and analysis and building our understanding and insights, but we hope to share the final report with you later this year. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much to reporters. I wanted to say, as a moderator, I want to ask a question, and then we will have a discussion, and then I will give the audience opportunity to ask their questions. So my question is as follows. It goes to our esteemed speakers. While it is clear that the work is still ongoing, but primarily European, how can we practically implement the early decommissioning of coal stations in Kazakh conditions? We have deficit. We don't have fair tariffication taking into consideration the cost of operating expenditures in coal stations, taking into consideration the environmental compound, CO2 particularly, and the existing works, the reforms. In fact, those are reforms that we are undergoing now, the single buyer, etc. Do you have some sort of vision how to practically implement it? Allow me to speak on behalf of the team. And if George has anything to add, please do so. So thank you very much for your question. This is a fundamental question right now, and the question without immediate solution right now, because the system has been operating for years and years. But to develop the modern trends, the problems must be resolved in the step-by-step way, particularly in the sphere of fair tariff imposing, taking into consideration all environmental aspects, subsidizing both direct and indirect. So all of that must be brought into the same coordinates grid to understand what is the role and potential of renewable and alternative sources in comparison to traditional sources. Maybe today we can combine clean technologies with other options to maintain the industry in a more or less competitive way. That is why the conclusion is that these barriers must be eliminated one by one. Grid constraints, and of course taking into consideration social impacts. This is it. Thank you. Thank you. George, do you have anything to add to Begjan's answer?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I think we're probably not in a position to make specific policy and regulatory recommendations at the moment. But I think what it comes back to is a lot of what Begjan was talking about from an investor perspective. So it is about sending the right signals to the market and attempting to reduce risk for those investors so as best to crowd in private investment. And that starts from the top, that starts from the government. But there are lots of large energy companies, investors out there who are already investing and are prepared to invest in renewables globally. So I'd say the first step, and it is a step process, like Begjan says, but the very first step is about sending those right signals to the market, attempting to reduce the risk where possible, because if you reduce risk, you reduce cost. And that's going to make renewables much more competitive against fossil fuel generation in Kazakhstan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're about to start the second part of our panel discussion. These are discussions, breathing discussions. Today we have 4 experts. Edo Mahendra, Special Advisor to Maritime and Investment Minister, and Just Energy Partnership Institute Specialist. Mr. Mahendra consults in the sphere of energy transition, PhD in the sphere of international development from the Oxford University. This is our first esteemed guest, Akbar, senior economist on building up the potential and professional development of the ABD Institute. Earlier, he worked in public bodies of Indonesia dealing with taxation and macroeconomics and investor relations. Master's degree from Carnegie Mellon University in the sphere of state policy. This is second expert. Third expert is Dina Ashgalieva, Senior Research Associate of the Research Institute of ABD. Before ABD, she worked as a research associate in the Institute for Energy Research of the National Institute in Singapore, worked in the University of Reading, where we worked on various projects within the framework of the Kazakh British Competitiveness Center. Marat Kaumenov, the moderator of the previous session. Today, Marat represents the Kazakh British Technical University Before that, for many years, he worked in the sector of energy, was one of the leaders of the Kazakhstan Electric Energy Association. He worked in KIGOK, the grid operator. This is our fourth expert for this panel discussion. So I have a question to Mr. Mahendra. Mr. Mahendra, you represent Indonesia, and we understand that Indonesia is already on that trail towards energy transformation and is ready to use the energy transition mechanism. So, what are the main reasons to decommission coal and start new energy? Is it because coal generation in Indonesia is expensive, or maybe it is of crucial detriment to nature? Maybe coal stations are obsolete, or maybe that is a necessity to comply to Paris Agreement and cut CO2 emissions. So, which one of these factors encouraged Indonesia to begin the transformation of its energy sector? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, the moderator. So that question is the answer is very simple. Every single of those factors contribute to the decision. One of the most important things for the energy transition mechanism is we chose to do so. And we know one of the critical point, you always have to make sure that this is good for your country. So we know this is good for our country. And it's not really because coal is expensive, because we are actually coal producing countries, right? And we actually, the price of coal, we have a domestic market obligation policy that actually subsidizes the electricity that is generated from coal fire power plant. So it's a combination of those. So we know this is good for our country, because we know that there is a secular trend anyway happening at the global level. And in the end of the day, we believe that by having this energy transition journey, it can secure, maybe not in 2 years, not in 3 years, but maybe in 10, 15 years, secure the competitiveness of Indonesia at the global market going forward. That's number one. Number two, we want to transform our economic structure. I mentioned in the previous session that Indonesia is really commodity based, and this has been happening for over 50 years. So we want to transform towards to become a high income economy. We need a more complex economic structure, and we do hope by embarking in this energy transition journey towards a low carbon economy, we can create many opportunities that go beyond the usual commodity base, which basically we dig, we just pick, and then we sell. So we want to transform ourselves. So it's part of this bigger picture of Indonesia's transformation towards our aspiration to become a high income economy, hopefully by 2045.
Thank you very much for your answer. My question goes to Mr. Akbar Jasnaldi. You deal with staying up the potential and professional development in ADB. So, what do you think the growth of potential, training of qualified personnel, changing the mentality of people who make decisions, how do they influence the fair and the timely energy transition? How do they contribute into that?
Thank you, moderator. I think at ADBI, because at ADBI we organize quite many conferences and also capacity building for the government official. And I think for the ATM, because you need to involve a lot of stakeholders, multiple stakeholders, not only government, but also private sectors and our power plant utilities company. I think it's crucial to, to give a proper education for those stakeholders, because we know that ATM is really important for the country, for Indonesia, also for the Kazakhstan. And Mr. Edo before in the previous session mentioned we had in Indonesia about more than maybe 100 public consultation and discussion. We need to convince the people and also government, especially the private utilities companies. Hard to convince them, right? Because when we retire the power coal plant, so it has to be incentive for them. So I think we need to treat the ATM as the not this business as usual. We need to use the proper market mechanism. There should be incentive for them to retire the coal power plant. And also, I think at the end of the day, with the ATM, we need to attract the private finance from the public and also the private sectors. We need to attract from the financial and banking institution. We cannot rely on the MDB or ADBs to implement the ATM. So at the end of the day, we need to involve the banking sectors, how to make the project attractive to them. Because if you see in the market, I think they're still using the market rate, the interest rate. And when we want to develop the greener or renewable energy project, most of the projects are not feasible enough. And then we cannot convince the banking sectors. They still want to adopt the market rates. But I think the government intervention here is really critical to have the successful the ETM in the country. And for example, I think the government need to provide subsidy for the banking sectors, because if they keep putting the usual or the market rate, it won't work. So I think again, I think the government's the government policy intervention is really critical for the ETM implementation in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. It is clear that on one side it is important for the government policy to be logical and consistent, but at the same time there is the right of private property, and investment climate in the country must not be breached or agitated. There must be some sort of symbiosis encouraged by both. Besides, Dina, my question goes to you. Probably one of the important elements in the course of analysis of the energy transition, we need data, we need research. And in your research institute, have you discussed or considered what kind of research must be mandatorily performed in this republic to successfully perform the transition? Thank you. Wonderful question. In the previous session, it was said that Kazakhstan is rich in coal. Why not use it? Besides, coal is very attractive for electricity generation. You burn more, you get more electricity. Quite attractive, is it not? As to renewable sources, all those informed know that there are a lot of problems in the course of generation process, and George has demonstrated how much needs to be done by Kazakhstan. Clouds, strong wind, we need to switch over to batteries, but all those problems have solutions. George and Begjan are showing how those problems may be resolved. The main problem about coal is air pollution, polluting the air, not only emissions. For example, here in Astana, for locals, air pollution is quite a torture. That is why renewable sources will, first of all, help to improve the air quality. Secondly, these are new, good quality workplaces. Earlier we dealt with the mining the mining operations, you dig it, you pick it, you sell it. So the transition to renewables will help create new positive workplaces, attract foreign investments. There are benefits behind that. So when we use more and more renewables, I like George and Begjan's table, how much Kazakhstan is supposed to fulfill. This is a complicated activity, I tell you, and they will require a lot of research, a lot of R&D, something that has never been done in Kazakhstan before. Of course, we will have a lot of mistakes based on which we will make appropriate conclusions, but we must be data-based, evidence-based. So, for example, we need to research how many batteries we will need, how many solar panels, how many wind facilities, etc. How many transmission lines do we need? We will need digitalization, data transmission, etc. In Japan, we were decommissioning coal-driven power plants, and experts from Japan shared their data with us, and I was surprised. They have a lot of data. They have data about electricity over each 30 minutes. A lot of research they conduct in Japan. It was a great surprise to me, and they told me that a lot of research is required by the government. This is a governmental requirement, and the data must be published in open sources.
Thank you very much, Dina. Marat, a question to you. You know very well what the issues are in the energy sector. You've worked with the power plants directly. You've discussed the rules of the game in renewable sector, in conventional energy sector. In your opinion, what does a just transition mean for those power plants that will have to be shut down? So what does it mean, a just transition? Thank you, Ainur, for this question. This is quite a philosophical question, I would say. When I was looking at the list of power plants selected as candidates, some of them are probably at the end of their life. Okay, so, of course, you can refurbish them and they could maybe work for many years, but every refurbishment, every modernization also makes them more expensive. So the question is whether we need to invest into old technologies, because in this case, these are indeed old technologies, or would we rather invest into new ones since it's already at the end of its life? Basically, the question is whether we'll build more of the same over the same technology, or but I think that we are already seeing that we cannot just burn the materials. We'd rather make something more useful out of it. Why would we burn something if we could create thousands of products from that? That is the main idea of this cyclical economy. So when we are looking at these power plants, yes, they require something. Either they will require refurbishment, or we can build something new, or we replace them with something else. And the experience of Indonesia shows us that transition to the new technologies will ensure this just transition. What does it mean? First of all, there are workers of the power plants. So the question is, what happens to these people when the plant is shut down? Second, this power plant generates the product that is needed by the district or the region. So if we are shutting down one plant, we need to make sure that the residents are getting the same quality or better quality heat and energy, but in a cleaner way. And third, what happens to the communities living around? Like there was a comment from someone who said that in our northern climate, the centralized heating is probably the most relevant solution. Whereas in Indonesia, for instance, that is not an issue. But also, there are so many other businesses that are directly linked into coal, transport companies, various other people. They also will be out of jobs, and we need to think what happens to them. When I asked this question, I was told that this is something that the government needs to take care of. But basically, on all levels, on the levels of local municipalities, national level, company level, everyone should be thinking about these aspects, about the people who either use these services or work in these power plants. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting response. Distinguished participants, you now have a great opportunity to ask questions to our speakers and panelists. If you want to ask questions, please raise your hands. I see the first question back there, please. And please introduce yourself. My name is Zhana Salimova-Tikaya. I am an expert in the area of financing energy projects. I have a question to George. Hopefully he's still online. So my question is as follows. In terms of the ranking that you got, I see, I think some of the plants on that list are not intuitive. So I wanted to ask about energy security. So maybe those plants might not be as significant for the national energy security, but they might be very critical to those towns where they're located. Did you take into account that factor when doing the ranking of the power plants from the standpoint of energy security? And also a follow-up in the same area, I think these plants, like intuitively thinking, they should probably have greater weights from the standpoint of just transition, because it's most probable that these small power plants are quite crucial for heat supply in these towns. So did you take that into account when doing your ranking of the power plants? Because some things seem to be counterintuitive to me. Financially, I guess that they were ranked quite low, but in terms of the other dimensions, I'm not clear on that. Thank you.
So just so I make sure I've understood the question correctly, it was for our MCA analysis, have we considered kind of local energy security, and then the question around just transition. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Whether these stations have been considered as critically important for the security, energy security of these small towns. And the same is whether the just transition has been factored in this ranking, because looks like these CHPs are very important for these small towns from the heating point of view.
Yeah, understood. So I'd say a brief answer would be yes, we have, but at a high level. Again, this is a high level screening, and I'd say it's also kind of top down. So the rationale being that yes, we need to consider energy security at the national and local level, but broadly speaking, it's always going to be cheaper to do that at the local level. Now, of course, you need the right supply chains, you need the right expertise, you need the right options, and we need to explore that further in the pre-feasibility study. but there are solutions out there that can provide that. So going back to the Norway example that was brought up earlier, they use a large amount of ground source heat pumps for kind of just distributed heating supply. So there are renewable options out there that are technically easier to install than, say, a new large power plant, and are therefore going to cost less. So again, we have factored it in at a high level, but we would say more technical analysis would need to be done on the ground, and that's what we recommend as part of the full feasibility study. And to your just transition point, yes, again, we have factored it in as best we can at a high level. We try to recognize, based on the data that we have, how local communities are likely to be affected, as well as direct workers, particularly from a heating perspective. But again, we always accept are looking for feedback on how we do this. There is no right way to do this, but it's we have to start somewhere, and someone has to do a first pass of this. So this is our first attempt, but we are still reviewing our results.
Thank you. Another comment. This is the first time I'm seeing this ranking, and I just wanted to make a few comments. So, for instance, Stepnogorsk is located in the north. This CHP is located 33 kilometers away from the town that it supplies heat to. It has probably the lowest efficiency in the country because of the losses. In my personal opinion, it brings more harm than good, to be harsh. So basically, I think the detail, if you look in that at the ranking in detail, you will see how correct the choices were. I think it will be quite easy to demonstrate that for that particular town, even using electricity for heating might be cheaper than building a CHP. This is just my opinion as a private citizen. I just remember that when they were working at the capacity market and they wanted to do some modernization, I looked at that particular CHP, and I was quite surprised to see the type of losses they had, because initially that power plant was opened for mining industry, not the town, and those mines are obsolete as well. And the CHP is located quite far away from the town, so heating supply was just a byproduct for them. This is just another example. A question? Please introduce yourself. Ardak Bukeidova, Forbes magazine. I have two questions. First, alternative energy. When we talk about renewable energy sources, can it, well, taking into account the batteries, the storage facility, can it replace the power plants that work for base load, like the nuclear power plant that was suggested for the base load? Who are you addressing this question to? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there will be volunteers. And my second question, to what extent do you think it's just or it's sustainable to produce green hydrogen for export in Kazakhstan, in a country where we are experiencing water deficits? Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Any takers? First question of baseload generation. Well, it's debatable. I'll try to take your question. Why is it debatable? Because no one is basically comparing those. What's the peculiarity of Kazakhstan? 60% of energy consumption is happening in the industry. Therefore, it's quite clear the industry cannot ensure the full transition. They might lose their distribution market. They're already working on that. Recently, I've heard a comment from the Ministry of Energy when they were asked, what do you think this 15%, is that achievable for Kazakhstan? The minister said that we can exceed those 15%. Why? Because the new construction is becoming cheaper and cheaper every year. And that would probably lead to acceleration. It's just when you're considering that, I think there is a big error in thinking when we only think of ourselves as a single country. We heard from the Jordan representative of Arab countries committee, and they said we have 40 experience of renewables. The very first lesson we learned, he said, is that it's impossible to only work on renewables just for your individual country. If you're building renewables, well, of course, you could even move away from nuclear power, but then someone has to support you. Like Bijan mentioned, they were looking, in one country, there might be a well-developed nuclear energy that supports the other country and so on. So that fluctuation can be balanced between several countries. So when we're working on our green agenda, we shouldn't forget that we've got neighbors who are also working on green agenda. And our energy systems initially, from the very beginning, were built in a way where, let's say, there is coal supply in Kazakhstan and hydro resource in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and we are interconnected. So when we are doing something, we also need to look at what the neighbors are doing. If we think about it, if we invest the money in Kyrgyzstan, who will be getting this energy? The both of us, right? And the both of us will achieve our climate targets. If we build the nuclear power plant, maybe the neighbors, so if we won't build it, maybe the neighbors will, and we can participate in the project. Still, there is a place for nuclear energy. We can expect the energy to grow, and having uranium, right, we already have the raw materials. And raw materials are ready products, right? Aren't ready products. Bigjan comments. In terms of technical feasibility, and in terms of what Marat has mentioned, the issue of economics is important. From the technical point of view, technically, renewables could work as more or less stable generation when linked with storage. But you know, the batteries right now are the most expensive way. So technically, yes, it's possible, but that's the most expensive way. We can only, we should only use batteries when all other opportunities are already exhausted, be it hydro potential of the country or using, managing the load and using the renewables for balancing purposes. In the world, there are examples, but mostly for island nations. They can be fully supported by the renewables because they don't have any other alternatives. So we do have other alternatives. We have some hydro potential. We've got our neighbors and so on that we can use. So technically, yeah, we could expand that, but that will affect the final price of energy. And from the standpoint of green hydrogen, I know some things. I can give you a comment on that. Again, that's the question of economics, because if the cost of production of hydrogen is competitive, less than $5, I think right now per kilo, then this would become economically feasible. In terms of water, from the numbers that I remember hearing here at the forum, nuclear power plants with 2.4 gigawatt, theoretically, the water losses for operation of nuclear power plants, it's about 60 million tons of water. That's through evaporation. But if we compare that to surface evaporation of Balkhash Lake, that's like order of magnitude smaller at least. And in terms of hydrogen, if we compare that to hydrogen, to produce 1 kilo of hydrogen, you need about 9 liters of water, fresh water. So whereas if the capacities work in the West, if we use it for energy generation, taking into account even that we are using some salt water and then going through desalination, the losses would be comparable. So imagine the scale of a nuclear power plant, so 1 gigawatt, and there a few dozen megawatt. Of course, this does not eliminate the matter of water supply, but I just want you to understand the order of magnitude. Any other takers, questions? Sorry, wait a second. I just wanted to add on hydrogen. On the first day of KazEnergy Forum, I participated in the hydrogen related session. And the issue of green hydrogen does not only involve the issue of water, there are other issues as well. There are solutions for each of these issues. They're costly. I'll give you an example of Singapore, for instance. They mostly don't have any of their own water sources, but they have invested into studying the possibility of producing green hydrogen. They are working basically, so the water, the sewage, it goes through the water treatment. They also collect rainwater. Some are afraid of this treated water, but this treated water can be so clean that there are no living organisms in there. They even mix it with rainwater because they don't have any minerals or nothing there. And when they don't have enough water that they import, they use this treated, purified water and rainwater. Some of the resources are more expensive, some of the water resources are less expensive. If you think that green hydrogen will exacerbate the water problem, maybe quite the opposite. Maybe it will resolve our problem because this will be investments into solar panels, for instance, for green hydrogen production. Maybe we could also get some water collection, like rainwater collection facilities or water treatment facilities. There can be quite different options. Question? Jandos Matai from KazEnergy Association. Just a follow-up. I just wanted to make something clear. An ideal example of a pilot project is you've shown in this short list Tekeli power plant. It's a question to Bigjan. So if you select Tekeli as a pilot, let's say for the next year, hypothetically, let's say the owners of the power plant are ready to participate, the government guarantees something, the ADB participates, and what will be the mechanism? So Tekeli has 24 megawatt. So basically what they're saying is that they undertake to decommission, let's say in the next 10 years, so 4 of their boilers, 4 of their units. They take certain commitments, so you get funding from ADB, from other institutions to do that. So hypothetically, so basically they're investing this money into, let's say, wind power plants. If it's a heating matter, they might be installing some heating facilities, and then they return this money through the tariff or not. Do I understand it correctly? So ideally, how should it work? Thank you. Sorry, guys. It turns out we only can ask one question, just brief one. It was already asked, right? Oh, sorry. Please go ahead. Let me start, and then maybe George will jump in. It's quite right, but there are no clear-cut solutions. It should be decided on a case-by-case basis. And as you've described, this option is possible. What kind of option would, it depends on what kind of options would be satisfactory for the owners.
Attract investments, replace with alternatives, and for example, get energy from a wind power plant, like one of the options, but this is not the only one. There are many mechanisms. Some secondary measures of support can be introduced. For example, Tekeli location. There we can have those emissions that were not made could be monetized. Thank you. George, do you have anything to add?
Not particularly. I think Bekshan is right there. It has to be case by case in terms of what the replacement capacity is. we're not in a position to comment on that because we haven't approached this case by case yet. This is very much a high level study, but that is an important next step. Identifying what the replacement capacity is and what that looks like. But equally, I think, as mentioned, there is always going to be a balance of the right amount of fair remuneration for the current generators and balancing that with kind of equitable outcomes for consumers. That will always be something to balance in this case.
Dear participants, thank you very much for the answer. First of all, thank you for active contribution. I am forced to disrupt our discussion and close today's session. Maybe I'm being a little blasphemic. Maybe we should discuss with the owners of the stations. Some of them will be happy to shut down their stations if we offer them good alternative options. So yes, mechanism we're discussing today is very important. It requires very deep research and consideration, and the Asian Development Bank shall not be capable of towing that activity on its own. All of us must make contributions. And another statement I have to say today, Kazakh Electric Energy Association and Kazakh Green are designing the long-term strategy for development of electric energy until 2035. And the discussed mechanism must be mandatorily integrated into the contents to document what kind of strategies we have for coal power plants. Otherwise, we will have a big unclosed question. Still, coal generation is a dominating part of our reality today. So that will be question number one. And later we can talk about fairness, security, and all other pillars. Well, thank you very much for your report. I want to thank all participants of today's discussion and wish all of us patience in our very considerate, very complex activity regarding energy transition mechanism introduction. Thank you.